very heavily infiltrated by the Zionist influence, by the Jewish and the Zionist influence. And it has been twisted into basically an army of Zionists. And that, as a result, has our country, our predominantly Christian country, serving some of the most diabolical ends in the world today. And that's something that doesn't sit well with me morally. And I know it doesn't sit with a lot of people morally, but people are being heavily confused and misdirected by all.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Ian Wendt Show. I have my guest, Mr. Cato.
Yes, sir.
Dezorra, right? That's how you say it?
Yep.
Cato Dezorra. So, been following Cato for a while now, and I love the research that he does, the fact that he's so well researched in the things that he talks about, and it's not just from a place of like, I saw this thing online and I'm going to post this, which is what everybody does.
Yes, not me.
But so you hit me up, I think because your followers, like, you kind of found me or I don't know.
Our followers wanted us to get
you
together.
ended up on my grid because my followers are telling me that you should come, and your followers are saying that you should come on mine, and so, or my followers are saying that. But anyway, what is the main thing that you want to like accomplish with this? Because I know that this is like one of the first podcasts that you've done.
Yeah.
What do you really want to get out of this? I know what I want to get out of it. I want to learn a lot, and we'll talk about what I want to learn. But like, what do you ultimately want to get out of this?
Yeah. Well, this whole thing started off as just a research journey, post 2020, like I think it did for a lot of us. And then as I learned more and more stuff, I just realized that what I was finding was so shocking and so groundbreaking and so unbelievable to people, especially in the United States, where we're very propagandized. I just realized people really need to hear this stuff. And it started out as a bunch of research into conspiracy, again, into our financial system, into our education system, all that kind of stuff. But eventually it led to things like ancient religions and stuff, because all this stuff does tie together. And I think one of the most shocking things for me, and I think a lot of people have been realizing this, is that we live in a predominantly Christian country. And that I think that's great. But Christianity in the United States has been very heavily infiltrated by the Zionist influence, by the Jewish and the Zionist influence. And it has been twisted into basically an army of Zionists. And that, as a result, has our country, our predominantly Christian country, serving some of the most diabolical ends in the world today. And that's something that doesn't sit well with me morally. And I know it doesn't sit with a lot of people morally, but people are being heavily confused and misdirected by all this stuff. So that is something I really think that people need to understand, is that with this confusion that exists, this intentional misdirection that exists that targets Christians, we are having a lot of aspects of our country used against us, and Christians are having a lot of aspects of Christianity used against them.
So what denomination of Christian are you? Are you Christian?
I'm not a Christian. I don't claim to be a Christian. There is a spiritual aspect to me. And
are you atheist?
I'm not an atheist. I'm definitely not. I definitely have a spiritual.
So you believe in like God or a greater power?
I do believe in God, and I do.
So you do believe in God?
I do believe in God, and I very much believe in demons as well.
Interesting.
I believe there is a.
So you're not Christian, but you're not
correct.
atheist. You believe in God.
Yes.
So you're kind of just on a journey.
I would say that
on a spiritual journey.
I mean, I think the difficulty with claiming a religion is that I found out to such a tremendous degree that religions are used as weapons against civilization.
Oh, I think we can all agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So if there is a religion that is a good religion or a pure religion, it is inevitable that it will be infiltrated and subverted by external forces. And once that process is complete, it will be used for its own. The evil people will infiltrate a good religion and use it for their own ends. And before long, you have people who may fundamentally believe in positive aspects of any kind of religion, but they're serving bad ends. And that just happens over and over and over and over.
Oh, we can agree on that for sure. I mean, I think it's interesting whenever somebody tries to tell me that I shouldn't question any religion or any like religious leader because, this is, like the whole thing that's going on right now with Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens about the pastors, they're men of God. You can't don't question them. Like, why are you questioning? They're men of God. They believe in God. They're this, they're that. That's the argument right now with yeah. Any of the questions or any of the like criticism of these pastors. You have these pastors that are getting up and doing sermons about Candace Owens. They're attacking the left in their sermons. Last time I checked, a pastor is not supposed to get up and just attack people and talk about conspiracy theories to his congregation. You're supposed to be talking about God and Jesus Christ and preaching his gospel, right?
Right.
And yet that's what these pastors are doing. And so when I criticize them, you have the people that are coming out of the woodworks that are just so, cognitively dissonant with their faith that they'll question everything else under the sun, but they refuse to question this because it questions their faith. And so it's always the answer of, no, these are men of God. And I'm like, what is your point? I've said this so many times. Some of the most horrific, awful, terrible things in history, in human history, have happened under the guise of faith, religion, and God.
And still are.
And they still are.
Right now. Yeah.
The worst thing that has ever happened in this area, specifically in eastern Idaho, I would say one of the worst things. I guess I've, for as long as I've been alive anyway, happened under the guise of religion. Right? People killed their children and buried them in their backyard because they believed that they were supposed to and they were sent by God and blah, blah, blah. Right. But when you really dig into it, it really just came down to someone who was pretending to be a man of God, who was infiltrated by the devil and who wanted a lot of money and control, did some absolutely horrific things.
Right.
And claimed faith.
And you can take that's like a microcosm. You can expand that to entire civilizations, entire nations.
For sure. So it's insane to me when people say, no, don't question men of God. It's like, they should be questioned more than almost anybody else because they come from a place where they can use that authority to garner the support and to basically mask the fact that they are actually evil underneath. Right? Like it's easier for men of God to play that game as opposed to somebody who doesn't have that kind of mantle that people already assume that you're a good person.
Yeah. Well, if they can get their followers to believe that they need to turn off their logic and turn off to a large degree their moral code and their intuition.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly, dude. Well, man, we're already off to a good start, brother. Before we get too into the weeds here, I really appreciate you making the trip out here. Sure. I do everything in person and I try to make it a very personal thing. And so as kind of gratitude for your time and taking the time out of your life and out of your job and everything to really like make it out here in the middle of nowhere, Idaho, reach over to your right. And I got a little...
Not middle to nowhere. It's a really nice town, actually.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, it's awesome, but it's out there. So I got some gifts for you.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
So this is a button down by a company that I've followed for a very long time. The guy that owns it's a good friend of mine, and these are the best button downs. It's Retro Rifle. So if you look close, there's always little guns or little things about the 2A community that are kind of hidden in the designs.
Nice, yeah.
I thought maybe since you're hanging out in Mexico, that might be something you want to wear out there.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
it's perfect.
And then so this is part of our monthly mag club that we do. It's just a PMag, and that's our recent one that we did about Star Trek. So every month has something to do with a historical event or pop culture.
Right.
And so
I saw you have a ton of these.
Yeah, dude, there's tons. And so that's the Star Trek mag that we did.
Awesome.
This is one of our t-shirts from our recent collection with official Patriot gear. I just thought maybe you'd like that design. And I really liked it. It came out really cool. The message is carry the torch. That's kind of our new
awesome
thing. It's all about leadership and service and just kind of standing out for people,
And this, neat.
Yeah. I wasn't going to let you buy it. You were looking at it before and I was like, don't buy it.
I'm pretty fond of this. Yeah.
So yeah, there's the pillowcase for you. And that thing, dude, you could drop that off a building and it's going to be fine.
I think so.
Yeah.
Beard butter. Perfect.
Yep, some beard butter. Or beard balm. So that's actually from a friend of mine who has a super small American business out of St. Louis. He puts it all together himself. It's all American made. Just a really good dude. Captain Beard Co.
Awesome.
So yeah.
Yep,
some oil to go along with it, and that's the unscented oil. Sometimes you just need that backup of
For sure.
just to keep it moist, but not necessarily have anything that's.
Yeah, cool. Awesome.
Challenge coin for official Patriot gear. And then there's just a couple things from First Form, just greens. If you have any problems with gut health, that stuff's awesome for it.
Cool. Who doesn't living in America?
Yeah, right. Exactly. But anyway, man, that's just kind of my way of saying thank you. I appreciate you, dude. That pillowcase, I think, is probably the thing you're most excited about, though. These things are awesome, man. And it's really just like, it's a fidget spinner at this point.
Yeah.
Like, I just mess around with it all the time. But
I didn't even know what it was. I just couldn't keep my
you
hands
couldn't
off
stop
it.
opening and closing it. I know, dude. I know. But anyway, let's get back into it. So, where do we leave off? I'm going to let you take it. I think this podcast episode, and this is exactly how I want it to be, actually. I anticipate this being a whole lot of you talking and a whole lot of me listening.
Okay.
And that is exactly how I want it, because I think there's a lot that I can learn and everybody else can learn. And so
Sure.
if you feel like you're talking too much, don't feel that way, because I think you
like
have
that
a lot to bring to the table, man. Yeah. So,
But once you get me started talking about these topics, I've done so much research.
oh, I know. I've seen some of your stuff, and I mean,
yeah.
it's just clips, but like, anyway, so let's get into this. So Christianity, I think everybody at this point can see that there's a very real agenda to subvert Christianity.
Yes.
To manipulate it, to make it something it's not, and to ultimately replace it with something else in an effort to destroy the very things that a lot of this country and a lot of our culture has been built on.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think that's not like a secret anymore. I think that's a very
It shouldn't be.
open
It should
thing.
be very obvious to every Christian and every non-Christian.
Yeah, but I also think that this isn't a recent thing. And this is the main reason that I wanted you to come on, because I think what you bring to the table is more research of history than almost anybody I found on the internet. So I would love for you to really dive into this topic and start from the beginning. And like, I want people to know too that are watching this, you know, this is coming from a place of, we're just going to talk about the facts. We're just going to talk about the truth. Yes. This isn't about attacking anybody. This isn't about, singling, like it's not about attacking. It's not about hate. It's literally just, I think there's a lot of people in this country right now that are very confused about everything that's going on. And there's so much propaganda. Yeah. And I just want to get to the truth. That's all I care about is the truth. I don't care who it offends. I don't care who it doesn't offend. I don't care what it supports. I don't care what it doesn't support. I just want the truth. So Cato, help us figure that out.
What a very simple thing a very simple way to look at it from the Christian perspective. All Christians should understand they are in a state of conflict. They are in a very powerful, very intense state of conflict, and they have been for a very long time.
And I think right now people feel that more than ever before.
They're starting to feel it, but they've been in a state of conflict for many centuries. And for about the last century or so, Christians, especially in the United States, have lost track of that. They just don't realize that they're in a state of conflict because they've been very comfortably kept into a bubble in the United States, where a lot of their awareness of their own history and the history of their own religion, and particularly the relationship that Christians have with Jews historically, that has practically been wiped from the existence of the Christian mind, especially in the United States. Not all over the world, but especially in the United States. So the United States, Christians in America have pretty much been turned into a weapon of Zionism without even realizing it. So they've been in a state of conflict for generations, and they don't think that they've been in a state of conflict. In fact, you could even look at times when, if you take the American Christian community and you ask them to think of when things were really peaceful and nice to be a Christian in America, maybe let's just say the 1950s, this country was already completely infiltrated and subverted by the 1950s and being used as a weapon of Zionism internationally by that time, because it started all the way back before even 1900.
Can you, before you jump into that, because I've done this and they've heard it, my followers have heard it from me. Can you give like the Reader's Digest version, just the brief rundown for a 5-year-old? What is Zionism exactly?
So Zionism is... something you have to do. This is very important to start off with. When you start researching Judaism and Jewishness and Zionism and everything related to that, you have to realize that to a tremendous degree, they use double meanings and hidden meanings a lot. There's many, many things that they say where they have their own meaning, and then they get everybody else to believe there's a different meaning. They do this a lot, and they've been doing it for many centuries. So in their own language, in their own vernacular, they might understand that there's hidden meanings, whereas everyone else doesn't really understand. So for the most part, a popular or common definition for Zionism would be maybe just that Israel has a right to exist as a state. And a lot of people won't really argue that. In reality, Zionism is quite a bit more malevolent than that.
Well, that's something that, I mean, when people say that, like when people come at me and they say, "Oh, you don't think that Israel has a right to exist?" My answer is always no. That's stupid. I believe everybody has the right to exist. That, like, I'm not here to tell you that anybody shouldn't exist.
Right.
And that's kind of, I think, what you're talking about is, and I've seen this. I've seen people, Zionists specifically, use that against me to try and say that that's what I'm saying. That when I'm calling out Zionism and the influence of Zionism in the country, in my country, and the fact that my tax dollars are going to support Zionism, which is not something that I ever subscribe to or believe in,
Right.
that all of a sudden now what I'm actually saying is that the people in that country don't deserve to exist.
Yes, all the time.
And I'm like,
standard attack.
and
They
it's
do it all the time.
stupidest argument ever. Right. And this is one of the main reasons that I think so many people are pissed off and not like, and so confused right now, because that's not the argument. Like, I don't think any people shouldn't exist. Like, everybody has the right to exist. It's kind of like the Black Lives Matter thing, right? It's like when you said all lives matter, all of a sudden now you're a racist. It's like,
right.
What?
Yeah, projecting those
all
meanings.
Lives do matter.
Projecting those meanings is a very, very common thing that they do. So that's
BLM,
not the real definition of Zionism. Zionism is a lot more malevolent than that. It's a lot more aggressive. And fundamentally, it's a political movement that started in the 1800s.
With Moses Hess, right?
What's that?
Moses Hess, correct?
He was one of the originators of the movement. Yeah.
Okay.
The real person who's kind of documented as the founder of Zionism is Theodor Herzl, right?
Yeah.
But Moses Hess would have been kind of like a sort of a spiritual leader, a spiritual originator. But Zionism is ultimately, it has a lot more to do with Jewish supremacy. Because yes, Zionism was the goal of having a Jewish state, which did not exist for a very long time for various reasons, which we can get into. But achieving Zionism and achieving the Jewish state was at that time pitched as a way for various European nations who have historically always had a problem with Jews in their midst for many, many centuries, very well documented. To get Jews out of those European countries and get them all their own state was perceived to be a solution. It'd be better for the Jews because they can all live somewhere, and then the Europeans can get them out.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but Theodor Herzl wanted that.
Very much
so.
The
father of Zionism himself was saying, we need to get out of Europe.
Yes.
And we want to just have our own country.
Correct.
Where it's only us.
Yeah.
Which is ultimately just nationalism.
Yes.
Yeah.
Extreme nationalism.
Which, by the way, nationalism at the end of the day is not, I don't consider, nationalism shouldn't be seen as like a terrible thing. It just means that you want to preserve your nation and nationality, right? But the problem is it's taken to an extreme in many cases.
It is.
And this is one of those cases.
Right. And that's because...
but why does that get buried?
Yeah. So this is another thing where it comes down to the way that Jews define things and the way that they see things and the double meanings that they have. So in biblical history, there is the way that they see it is ultimately there's only one nation that really matters or has a right to exist, the chosen nation, which is going to be their nation, right?
Yeah.
That's why I'm sure since 2020 you've heard of the New World Order conspiracy, the idea of the New World Order.
I've heard of that since 2010, 2015.
Yeah, it's actually very old. The New World Order. The first time you really see that published is in a book that I've seen it published. I haven't seen it published before that. Was in a book that I believe was published in 1928. Around that time by H.G. Wells.
Really?
Yes.
What's it called? Do you know?
The New World Order.
It's literally called.
It's called the New World Order. We can
pull
find,
that up real quick. Pull up it's called the New World Order by H.G. Wells.
Yeah, and it's and that is a book that is it's more looking at a sort of a scientific engineering way to reorder the world.
Okay.
But the idea of the New World Order. Yeah.
Yeah. Does it say when it was published?
Should be
19.
Looks like 1940.
1940. Okay.
I believe that was an expansion on a previous book that he had because he was writing on a similar. I believe there's a book called The Open Conspiracy. Look up The Open Conspiracy. I believe that was published in the 1920s, also by H.G. Wells. And the New World Order, I'm fairly sure, is kind of like an evolution of that. So The Open Conspiracy is basically a conspiracy that he was talking about. It doesn't have anything to do with Judaism per se, but it is the idea of creating a kind of a group of scientists and engineers that should reorder the world.
Yeah, there it is.
And
1933. The version published by Golan's London.
Yeah, see, Blueprints for a World Revolution, published in 1928.
Yeah, so
that was the original.
So the Open Conspiracy, Blueprints for a World Revolution, was published in 1928. Yep, by H.G. Wells, when he was 50. Is that 52 or 62? I'm blind. It was revised. There we go. Thank you, buddy. 62, right? It was revised and expanded in 1930 with additional subtitle, a second version of this faith of a modern man made more explicit and plain. In 1931, a further revised edition appeared in the What Are We to Do with Our Lives? The final version appeared in 1933 under its original title. Many of its ideas are anticipated in Wells' 1926 novel, The World of William Clissold. Is that said?
And what's interesting, the same year that this was published, the original one, Blueprints for a World Revolution, that should be the same year that Brave New World was published by Aldous Huxley.
So I was going to ask you about that, actually, because I know of that one. And you know what? I was going to keep reading. It says the book is in Wells' words, a scheme to thrust forward and establish a human control over the destinies of life and liberate it from its present dangers, uncertainties, and miseries. Interesting.
So a very big theme of that book is to eradicate the idea of nationality and nations, to bring everybody under one single global nation.
Which ultimately, that has been, I think that's largely understood in the conspiracy world.
Right.
That's what the New World Order is to eradicate tradition.
Right.
To basically make it so that there's nothing to fight for or hold on to. Because that makes people easily controlled.
But the idea of the nation is very important. Like the word nation and the concept of nation is very important, because the New World Order is very much, whatever that means, generally speaking, the idea of the New World Order conspiracy, you could also call it the Jew World Order conspiracy, because for many centuries in Jewish prophecy and Jewish, predictions and Jewish scheming, they've had the idea of eventually rising as the one sort of only legitimate ultimate nation. Really? Yes.
That's like a well-known thing in Judaism.
Yes, especially in rabbinical Judaism.
Is that why they
a lot
call
of rabbis
the chosen
and stuff
people?
they talk correct? Yeah.
Really?
So ultimately, in their worldview, all other nations will eventually basically fall away because they're not legitimate.
Well, I know that's true because I've heard them say that.
Right.
Yeah, I know that
they're not legitimate.
That's the chosen people.
They believe the only real nation that has a right to exist
is the Jewish nation.
nation.
I do know that that's a fact because we'll get into this, but because the difference between Judaism and like other religions or whatever is, it's not just a religion; it's an ethnicity.
Yeah,
that's unlike
it gives
any
them a very unfair advantage,
and that's unlike any other religion because Christianity isn't an ethnicity; it's a religion.
Right. That gives them the ability to flip flop in between the two. Very convenient.
Which I want to get into,
for
but
a long time. Yeah.
I kept reading this. It's really interesting because it says. It says, proposes largely as the result of scientific progress, a common version of the world, politically, socially, and economically unified, is emerging among educated and influential people. This can be the basis of a world revolution aiming at universal peace, welfare, and happy activity.
Sounds a lot like communism, doesn't it?
Sure does.
Which is also a Jewish invention.
We'll get to that. Establishment of a world commonwealth. Commonweal? Yeah. This is to be achieved by drawing together a proportion of all or nearly all the functional classes in contemporary communities in order to weave the beginnings of a world community out of their selection. These words are really, really interesting that they're using because it literally sounds like communism.
And it sounds a lot like Judaism.
It's Marxism.
Yeah. If you listen to a lot of what rabbis say and have been saying for many centuries, they predict a lot of this will happen when there is basically when Judaism rises to be the one true religion.
This will happen.
Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong, because I've heard this before, is that like during the time of Moses Hess, is it true that Moses Hess actually helped Karl Marx write part of the Marxist manifesto?
I think that he was kind of a consultant. Yeah.
Because
they had a personal relationship. They had a correspondence that went many years.
Because Marx started as a socialist, right? Or was it the opposite? Was he a communist and then became a socialist, or was he a socialist?
Well,
and became
interestingly,
a
he
communist?
came from a long line of notable Jewish rabbis.
That's what I'm
But
saying.
he was considered to be an apostate or an atheist Jew.
Yeah, because
So
eventually he turned away
Jewish.
from all of it.
Right. And he was promoting atheism. But if you think about it, because like I said, many, many times, this is common throughout all the history of Judaism and of Jews. They are promoting things to other people that are not good for those people. And they know that. They're very well aware of that. So in that case, in the case of Karl Marx, promoting the idea of communism wrapped up in that would have also been atheism. Now, Jews are not often atheist, right? There are some ethnic Jews that would be considered atheists, and that
But most
to a
of
large
them believe
extent,
in God.
right?
They believe in the Old Testament God.
Right.
Yeah.
So an odd thing is that most Jews are very, very religiously devout and have the idea of not just God, but God choosing them and creating their racial and spiritual supremacy, and that's sort of like a foundational part of Judaism. But then you have a bunch of Bolshevik communist revolutionaries, primarily Jewish, who are pushing the idea of communism, and wrapped up in that was atheism.
You're referring to, and this is correct me on the timeline, but this is like early 1900s.
Early
Russia.
1900s, yeah.
That was the Bolsheviks, right? That was
Large
the
scale
Bolshevik
revolution happening
and
all
everything,
over Europe.
which,
yeah.
weirdly enough, we don't really talk about a whole lot.
We really should.
We
'Cause
really
that was
should,
a
though,
defining moment for Western civilization.
Well, and because the Bolshevik Revolution and everything that happened in Russia, dude, that was like, that makes any other genocide and any other thing that's happened in history look
totally
like
paled by
child's
comparison.
play.
Yes.
I mean, how many millions of people were murdered?
Well, it's not even known because their records were also erased.
They
from
literally
existence.
couldn't keep track of it.
Right.
But that's also like, that's all the stuff where we talk about they sent them to islands to become cannibals because there was no food. Because this is
The Gulag Network was like
the
thousands.
gulags. Yep. And this was all, there were mass graves. And this was all during the, what do they call it? What was it that, because this was during Stalin, right? So what was the whole famine?
This would
thing?
actually predate Stalin.
Oh, this is before Stalin.
Right.
Oh, that's right. Duh. But yeah, anyway, sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah.
You
So-
educate us.
So yeah, that whole time period, you're right.
Yeah.
It absolutely rocked the world of Europe, right? The Bolshevik Revolution. And there was actually earlier, so Russia had actually had a bunch of problems with radical Jewish revolutionaries for decades.
Yeah.
And that's something that's also kind of written out of history books. But they had really radical, hardcore Jewish terrorists that had been plotting against and successfully blowing up and murdering and assassinating various members of the Russian government and also members of their royal family.
How do we know that to be true? Because
It's very well documented in Russian history.
in Russian history.
Yeah.
Where specifically? Because I know for a fact that people are going to watch this and they're going to say, that's not true. There's nothing, you can't find anything on the internet about that, blah, blah, blah. Like, help us understand.
That you can find on Wikipedia. That's not even hard to find.
Yeah.
Yeah. The fact that there's so they already had a lot of problems with Jewish revolutionaries.
Yeah.
And that's because it's
well documented. It's
very much
100% facts.
Yeah. Because well before that, the Russian Empire had basically, through wars, it had taken over a large portion of what would now be considered Eastern Europe. And that's where most of the Jews had lived. The reason they kind of concentrated in that region was because for many centuries they had been kicked out of all the various European
Other countries.
nations and city-states. And,
Yeah.
but any size from an individual city-state to a large empire, they had been kicked out for a number of various reasons. And so they managed to sort of concentrate in what would primarily be Poland, parts of Lithuania, Latvia, Ukraine. That whole region was an area known as the Pale of Settlement. And they lived in sort of relative peace for a while. And then I forget the year, but the Russian Empire was able to basically add that whole portion to their empire. And, Russia was a very Christian and very strong Eastern Orthodox nation.
Yes.
So when they took over that region that was completely populated by Jews, not completely, but heavily populated by Jews, and Jews being able to do their own things that they do, they came into a lot of conflict with the Russian government.
And that's how the Jewish revolutionaries rose. Can you search, Joe? Can you search, what should we search? Jewish revolutionaries, Russia, 19...
Well, you can definitely look. So that would be back in like the 1700s.
Oh, 1700s.
That was taken over. There was a series of wars where the Russian Empire was able to add what is now known as the Pale of Settlement. The Pale of Settlement is a very large.
So should we just look up the Pale of Settlement?
If you do, that'll give you that'll take you down that path. Yeah.
Okay.
So there ended up being a lot of conflict between Christian Russians
And Jews.
and Jews in that region, and not just between the actual sort of general population, but the government, because the Russian government was imposing a lot of laws on the Jews, which would be considered Christian laws that the Jews really didn't like.
Yeah.
Now, there's a long history of that. I mean, you can go back for the last 2,000 years, there's been Christian societies, not 2,000, maybe 1,700. There's been many, many centuries of conflict between Christian societies, mainly governments, and Jews that lived under the authority of Christian kings and Christian empires. So in that period.
Okay, so Pale of Settlement, the area of territory in the Russian Empire ultimately included nearly 500,000 square miles.
Right.
Poland, Ukraine, Belarus.
And these would be the Ashkenazi Jews specifically.
Yeah, the Ashkenazi Jews, exactly how I said it. Go down, scroll down. Where the Jewish people, in which Jewish people could reside. The immediate catalyst for the establishment of the Pale is territorial gains by Russia after the partitions of Poland, 1772, 1793, 95, up until 72. It had been illegal for any Jew to reside in Russian territory, but by the end of the third partition in 1795, Russia and the largest Jewish population in Europe, rather than attempting to expel hundreds of thousands of people, the government of Catherine the Great sought to achieve a balance between taking advantage of the presence of the distinctive population and insulating Russian merchants and craftspeople from competition with their Jewish counterparts. Thus, the government combined the form of enlightened absolutism with traditional anti-Jewish sentiments and prejudices in the Christian population.
And it's important to understand at this point that at this point in history, the 1700s, Christians all over Europe, they had already had many centuries of problems with Jews. And the Jews knew that. There was absolutely no secrets at this time that Christians had problems with Jews and Jews had problems with Christians.
It was just known.
They're oil and water. Yeah. They've been oil and water for all of Western history.
And they all knew it.
Everybody knew it. This was very, very... So the fact that around 1900 and onward, we have this idea of Judeo-Christianity in the United States is totally bizarre. And it violates basically the entire recorded history of the relationship between Christians and Jews, because they had never gotten along, and it was always going to be one ultimately defeating the other. And they all knew that. They coexisted, but very uneasily. And it inevitably, because Jews had the sort of idea of always preying on Christians, all Gentiles really, but Christians are the ones that they've had the most sort of relationships with, they always would end up getting kicked out. That's why there's a number that floats around quite a lot in, the internet when people talk about this stuff. They say that Jews have been kicked out of countries 109 times. It's a very common. And the only reason that is, it's actually more like 112 now. But the only reason that is true is because the idea of the country itself, the definition of country, is fairly new. Because countries, modern nation states, didn't start to exist until the late 1700s, the age of revolutions and onwards.
Was it around this same time?
Before that, roughly.
Okay.
Before that, you had empires, which were huge, large, swaths of land, and you had individual city-states. In a lot of medieval history, you had individual city-states, which would literally be one city that was governed like its own government, and it had only maybe a trading relationship.
Yeah, I mean, like the Holy Land. How many empires took over the Holy Land in how many years? Right?
Many. I don't know.
Many.
Yeah.
Well, that's many.
And all over Europe, there were hundreds of individual city-states and principalities. And sometimes they were part of empires. Sometimes an empire would fall, and all of these little city-states would be their own governments. So if you add everything from individual city-states all the way up to large empires, and you take the total times that Jews have been kicked out of those, and not all of them were Christian, but most of them were, it's over 1,000 times in recorded history that they've been kicked out. So when you say they've been kicked out of 109... When you say
kicked out, what does that mean exactly?
It means they're rounded up and kicked out, expelled from there, yeah. Typically, completely, and it is not ever really been, well, I shouldn't say it's not ever, but for the most part, it has not been a decision that's taken lightly, because Jews have always had a large amount of wealth and a large amount of influence, always.
And so when the decision is being made, it's being made at a cost.
Yes.
And the people that are making the decision know it.
Yes, always.
Interesting.
That is very consistent. So it's never easy for these kings or princes.
Can you give some early examples?
Well, in my opinion, the earliest example of Jews being kicked out is Egypt, ancient Egypt, the story of Exodus. And people, were told that that is a story where they were slaves for hundreds of years and then they were rescued by Moses. But what nobody really seems to pay any attention to is that they left with an enormous amount of gold, right? They left with gold, and they had enough gold that they were able to melt it down and build it into a statue, which would be many pounds of gold, and that would be worth many millions of dollars. So I think it's a little bit funny that there is the story that they were kicked out as slaves, but they obviously had a tremendous amount of wealth with them. So, that's something that doesn't really mesh. But that could be considered the earliest expulsion. But after that, there is, they were able to build their own empire. There was the twin empires of Judea and Israel that were, thrived for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And actually something that I consider to be sort of a false narrative is that in sort of the biblical narrative, you think of Jerusalem or Judea as kind of being a little Jewish, place in the Middle East that's kind of left alone and wants to live by itself and kind of, just kind of they're being left alone, or they want to be left alone, but they're being bullied about by the big mighty Roman Empire.
Yeah. And
in reality, there's quite a bit of evidence that they had their own very large, very influential, and very wealthy and powerful trading empire. And the reason that Rome came into conflict with the Jewish empire is because it was powerful, because it was a threat.
Really?
Yes. And that's why their conflict with Judea lasted for a total of about a century and a half.
Can we pull that
from
up?
beginning to end?
What should we search? What can you search to pull that up?
You can search the Empire of Judea. I have a book on that, but it's a very hard to find book. It was published in the 1930s too.
This is what I love about you, Cato. Type in Empire Judea. So this is just the AI overview. Zoom that in real quick.
Yeah, and AI, of course, is going to be sort of an amalgamation of establishment sources, so you're not going to find anything counter-narrative.
Yeah. I'm not necessarily saying...
There's a book called The First Bid for Jewish World Power.
The First Bid for Jewish World Power.
Yeah, and it was
Let's read this and then let's look that up.
Early 1900s.
Judea was a region, existed as various empires, including kingdom as province of the Roman Empire, 6 AD, 135 AD. It was originally a kingdom of Judea, self-governing kingdom that eventually became Babylonian and Persian province, before being ruled as a client kingdom of Herod the Great. Okay, we all know that.
Right. This is like the biblical time period.
Yeah. Okay. So go down. Kingdom of Judea, the Iron Age kingdom was the origin of new name Judea, region around Jerusalem, Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian rule. This is all well-known stuff. So
it's establishment history.
Yeah. Okay.
But Jews have always been successful in business. That book's called The First Bid for Jewish World Power.
Type that in. Yeah. The First Bid.
I have a lot of very obscure sources.
No, that's okay. I mean, dude, that's...
Yeah, a lot of stuff from the 1800s.
Join the club.
There was a tremendous...
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have courses that are available that include all these resources, right?
I do. So my sort of flagship course on this is my Talmudic teachings course.
Okay.
Where I've put it's 11 lessons, and I'm still adding more, and there's a few bonus lessons too, but I consider it to be like a textbook.
And it has all these research things in it.
It does. And it's not just on the Talmud, because the Talmud, which we'll discuss a little bit more, but the Talmud is sort of a chief... It's kind of like the core book in Judaism, right?
Okay.
And a lot of stuff comes out of the Talmud that would be considered to be diabolical. Some of these quotes float around the internet, and people think, "Oh my God!"
And I do want to get to that, because I think that there's nuance to all of it.
There is.
So,
but there's a lot of history there too, because
sure.
You can't just look at the Talmud and even like begin to understand it. You have to understand it contextually.
And that's honestly why I never even touch it, because I'm like, I don't understand it, and I know that there's nuance to everything, and I want to be able to understand it fully before I can ever, I just.
And it's over 6,000 pages long.
Yeah,
so there's almost nobody who can claim to understand it. Even rabbinical scholars don't understand it.
Interesting.
But there is a lot of stuff that you can pull out of it. I mean, there's everything from genuine wisdom to absolutely diabolical things that would make Christians' skin crawl. And you just haven't heard these things because it's their book and they don't want anybody else getting a hold of it. Also, for many, many centuries, it was considered basically satanic literature by the Catholic Church. And there were many attempts to eradicate it. They were rounded up, they were burned, but of course they always went underground. So many copies have survived over the centuries. Now you can find it on the internet. But for many, many, many centuries, nobody even knew what it was. And the Catholic Church, which was sort of like the Christian, world power for many centuries, they were trying to eradicate it, to stamp it out of existence.
Hold that thought about it not being available, because I want to talk about, okay, when did it become available and why? Mm-hmm. Before we do that, though, what do you make of this? So we looked up the the bid for Jewish power.
Yeah. I believe it's Jewish World Power.
Jewish World Power. The first bid for Jewish World Power, and then just type in book, right?
Right.
Do you know who wrote it?
I don't, but I can dig it up. That's not it. The Protocols is a different thing.
Yeah, I know what that is. That is different.
And I have a mini course on that as well. That's really fascinating.
The Protocols of the Elders of Zion.
There we go.
There you go. There it is. 1930. Internet Archive.
Right.
There it is. That's the full book.
That is a full book. Yeah.
Holy crap. You're not kidding. That's a real thing. That is, so that, pull that back up. That's the Internet Archive. That's the actual book itself.
That's an actual book that discusses the
official reprint. So what, go to like the title page or something, or the, like,
that talks,
go to
and
that.
it uses a lot of Roman sources, ancient Roman sources.
Here, go back to the top. Recent years have seen a stirring among the dry bones of history and some attempts to rectify errors and supply omissions. The strange reticence of historians generally as to the part played by the Jews, especially in the Roman Empire and Roman Republic and Empire, has led inevitably to grave misconceptions. It has come to be believed that the Jewish people, after their partial return to Judea from the second captivity, innocently incurred the hostility of Rome, which culminated in the destruction of Jerusalem and their final dispersion. We have been induced to imagine that they subsequently found themselves in scattered groups, frequently exposed to unmerited persecution, which demands the sympathy of civilized mankind. This impression, which is eminently advantageous for the Jewish point of view, especially at the present time, is absolutely false.
And remember, the present time is 1930.
Yeah, this is 1930.
So there was a lot, this whole
But there was a
awakening.
lot.
This
There was a
awakening
lot
that's
of
taking
this
place
in Europe.
now. Yes, there was.
There was
much.
a lot of actual anti-Semitism,
and very well founded and very historical
because of what was going on.
Because of what was going on in the world. At this point in time, everybody in Europe understood that the Bolshevik Revolution was a Jewish revolution.
Really,
it was very well understood. Yeah,
they knew. Okay,
they knew that the communists were mostly Jews. This was perfectly common knowledge at that time. There's many books published at that time. Now, after World War II, who really won World War II? Right? We think the Allies won. The Allies being the United States, the UK, various other countries. And then of course the Soviet Union. And it's very bizarre that the United States allied itself with the Soviet Union, because you couldn't really even think of a more polar opposite country, and yet they're allies. That's very weird. But when you look at who's pulling the strings of all the nations that were considered the allies, in all cases it was Jewish power and Jewish influence, Jewish bankers. So after World War II, you find that the people who were the most dominant in the world were the Jewish string pullers, essentially.
And that's truth. I know that. I've looked that up
and
myself.
That's when all of this kind of history suddenly disappears. After World War II, you don't see any of this stuff being published anywhere.
Ever.
I mean, not really, maybe very obscure places. What would be considered Nazi literature?
Well, I mean, this is the first time, the only place you can find this is the Internet Archive.
But before that, you have professors, you have statesmen,
Who is it that wrote
you have
this?
Scholars. This is a bit of an odd source, because if you look up, it says the Duke of Northumberland, which is very odd. And so the Sons of Liberty was an American organization, and they were republishing something. This says reprinted in 1976, right? So that's this printing, but first printed in 1930. So I'm fairly sure that this was a UK-based publication. But after World War II, all of this kind of stuff goes underground. So you can only find various random sort of American-based, what would be considered neo-Nazi or anti-Semitic type of groups and whatever. I don't know too much about that organization. They would probably be categorized as like a white supremacist group. Or
I've
something
never even
like
heard of them, so I don't know. What? So who wrote it originally? Type in, see if you can find who actually wrote it originally. Because I don't want to know who rewrote or who reprinted it, who wrote it originally.
And for the most part, this book is using ancient Roman sources.
Well, I saw that. Yeah.
Which, if you just think about the fact that the mighty Roman Empire is talking about Judea in the context of almost a peer, right? Because they were locked in conflict with them for a century and a half. And obviously this conflict was so long that the Jewish Empire was not by any means an easy win. It was a very, very big challenge for them, and they had to go to repeated wars against it in order to subdue it.
Okay, there you go. Is that it? You'll know better than I do. I don't know. Is that it?
The Frederick, if we go up a little bit where it says Frederick Milligan, I'm not familiar with that, but the other one, Major under the pseudonym, Major Osman Bey Major Osman Bey was also a writer at this time. He was a writer in the late 1800s that wrote similar books like this.
It's also important to distinguish this from modern political movements like Zionism, which was articulated by Theodore Herzl.
Right.
And the Jewish State. That's his book. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that book, too, the Jewish State is literally all about nationalism.
Very much so.
And
what's really interesting,
and it's something they don't talk about a lot.
No, what's very interesting is there's excerpts from that book and also from Theodore Herzl's other correspondence.
Yes,
along with his other partner, the other founder of Zionism, which I can't recall his name at the moment. But they fully acknowledged that Jews were intolerable to Christian society.
Really?
Yes.
In the book.
Yes, in a lot of their writing. They're basically saying, it's totally understandable and reasonable that the Christians want to kick out Jews for a number of different reasons. They consider us to be intolerable, and that's totally fair. So the solution to that is by us establishing our own Jewish state. They're basically leaning into that energy. They're like, you know what? There's all this anti-Semitism, and it's totally legitimate. So let's use that energy in order to create our own Jewish state. It's pretty well acknowledged at this time.
You know what's crazy is I just made a post about, I don't even know who the guy is, but it's some Jewish guy who's basically saying, so the first post I made, it was him saying, I can send this to you, Joe, if you want to pull it up. But the first one was him saying that anti-Semitism is the cause of the downfall of most societies. That if a society becomes anti-Semitic, they're bound to fall. They're bound to fall. And he's basically laughing about it and like bragging about it because he's like, hey, if you want your society to fall, be anti-Semitic, right? Yeah. But then there's another piece where and I don't know if it's before that or after that, where he literally says, I just made this post. He says, screw it, I'm going to pull it up. He goes, hey, I'm going to send this to you, Joe. Pull this up on the MacBook. I'm airdropping it. We'll just pull it up and we'll watch it because it's crazy. When I first saw it, I was like, this is coming. I literally just made this post and I was like, you can, like, the caption was something like, call me a liar. You can't, because you'd have to call this guy a liar, and this is your guy, man. Like, so listen to this. Push play and turn it up a little bit.
Jewish rabbis are a great source, by the way.
When I read Hitler, and I've read a lot of Hitler. When I read Hitler, and I've read a lot of Hitler, and I've read also really like the whole. I'm a student of World War II and the Holocaust, but also World War II in general. There's no question that Hitler and the Nazis were fueled by old anti-Semitism, old goblin-like anti-Semitism. The hook-nosed Jew controlling everything. That whole thing.
You hear that coming out in him, too.
Right?
He's like, grab them by the bone and say, "You Jew."
Yeah.
Right.
Like there's something
the strong Aryan white and the sniveling weak Jew.
Right.
You hear that in his messaging there.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a very good point. There is definitely a throwback, and he even says, "What do you think? It's just a throwback?" It's like, yeah, it is a throwback. But there's another side to it, which is something that I don't know if you're going to be comfortable talking about, but he's also angry at the leftiness of American Jewry. He's angry at progressiveness, which has brought in all the gay movement, the LGBT movement. The Jews have led all that stuff. And the Hollywood, which has sown a lot of immorality, a lot of stuff that Jewish people do bring. See, the real truth is, you and I, we're red. If we were states, if we were American states, we're red state guys, okay? In so many of basically in the three big ones, Bible, family, nationalism, defense, we're red, the way we look at things, okay? But to deny that the Jewish people have a strong, strong blue streak, and in America, bluer than red, and that all the progressive organizations are all run by Jews or have Jewish people or have Jewish money, to deny that Soros has a huge impact on this world and has a huge impact on the American agenda, to deny that these things exist, and that he's saying, you're taking our country in a way that is not its natural way. There is an argument to be made there. Hitler made the same argument. He was very concerned about communism. And he wasn't wrong that the Jews were the leaders of the communist movement. They took over the Soviet Union. It was many ways a Jewish thing.
Literally everything you just said is confirmed by a rabbi.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Like, when I first heard that, I was like, every time I've ever said anything like that, I'm called an anti-Semite and I'm a Jew hater and I'm the worst of the worst people.
Standard.
Sorry, bro. This is your people literally saying everything that Cato is saying right now. Like 100%, it was the communist revolution was led by Jews. 100%, a lot of the subversion of the Christian beliefs and the Christian values and the things that we as Christians stand absolutely vehemently against were introduced by Jews.
Yes.
Like he's saying
And they were in Germany too.
And they were in Germany.
Yes.
And they were all over Europe. And so when you're talking about the fact that they were, expelled from these countries and things like that, I can't help but think, well, that's maybe a big reason why.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is truth. It was just confirmed
Yes.
by a freaking rabbi.
Yes.
So come at me.
Anybody who's really studied it will know that there's absolutely no question. It is proven century after century.
And now you're
after
saying
century.
Theodore Herzl himself was also saying it. And so if I wouldn't disagree, I wouldn't doubt that. Like if the rabbis are saying it themselves, why would Theodore Herzl not? It's almost like they don't care. Like this is just a reality that they believe this to be true and they know that it's true and they don't care if it offends anybody.
Right.
Because it's just truth.
Well, Jews get away with saying a lot of things that no one else gets away with saying.
Yeah.
That's
Weird.
we just have to acknowledge that.
Weird.
Yeah. But
Anyway,
there's a really incredible history of the sort of interplay between Jewish and Christian society. And it's really fascinating, but there's many examples of Jews themselves. And it's not fair to talk about Jews as a monolith either. There's many different angles and different opinions and different.
What do you mean by that? Expound on that.
Well, Jews they are a single group, whether you call them a race or
but there's different types.
Or spiritual. Yeah,
let's go into that.
But
a little bit.
they run the gamut
I think
there's
that's something that a lot of people don't.
There's right wing Jews and there's left wing Jews, and historically at that time in the late 1800s there was Orthodox Jews and there were Reform Jews.
What's the difference?
So the Reform movement, and this is something that had the late 1800s were really a big deal with respect to the Jewish community. The Jewish community itself was trying to answer the Jewish question. In fact, the phrase "the Jewish question" was coined by Jews, and it was really, what are we going to do about our inability to get along with European society? How are we going to solve this problem? Because there was anti-Semitism. And
the main reason was because the cultures clashed. Just simply put,
they can't not clash.
They have to clash because they're completely opposite.
Because they're fundamentally opposed in almost every single way.
And
in
they
values,
themselves
morals,
recognize that, and we're asking, how do we fix this?
Yes, because they had lived in Europe for so long, they had been kicked out of so many places for so long, and for the most part, a lot of them just wanted to get along. And so there was this movement in the late 1800s, which was called Reform Judaism. Now, you brought up Moses Hess earlier, who's sort of one of the spiritual, leaders of sort of a pre-Zionist,
like labor Zionist,
a pre-Zionist. Yeah. He would be considered to be someone who was I think he would fall more into the Reform Judaism camp, but he kind of lamented that because he thought if Jews are reforming themselves to basically fit in, to pretty much become more European. And
I've read this, actually. Now that you're saying this, I read this somewhere. That he legitimately, this is, I remember reading this. He was opposed to it because the Reform Jews, I didn't know they were called Reform Jews until right now, but they were basically saying, like you said, we are going to dumb down our own religion. Right. We are going to dilute our culture. So that we fit in so that more we can get along with the rest of the world. Yeah. And
because we like living here, we make a lot of money with them, we want to do business with them, and we don't want to get kicked out.
And Moses Hess was completely opposed to it because he was like, no, absolutely not. We're not going to change ourselves just because of everybody else.
He was kind of,
or was that Theodore Herzl?
I read his. So yeah, I'll get to that in a second. So Moses Hess, he wrote a book called Rome versus Jerusalem.
Yes,
which isn't really a book; it's more of a collection of letters.
It's like a manuscript.
But he was kind of lamenting. He was lamenting what was going on with Jews at that time because he understood that Reform Judaism was a big movement, but he was lamenting the fact that Jews were going to basically lose their Jewish soul.
It was almost like it was necessary, but he hated the fact that it was necessary.
Yes. That is how he is expressing himself in Rome versus Jerusalem.
I remember reading this when I made a highlight on my Instagram about Zionism, and I remember reading this.
And his book was published in the mid 1800s, whereas the Theodore Herzl's work didn't come out until later, so he would have been influenced by Moses Hess.
Yes.
And so when Herzl came out, he was more, so the Zionists came about, and Zionism, the Jewish community being as divided as it usually is, they're often divided, but typically they're always anti-Gentile. They just find different ways of doing it. But there was the communists, which of course, you know, we know a lot about communism, but Zionism was a movement where they were basically saying, let's not reform ourselves. Let's not dilute our culture to get along with Europeans.
Let's just segregate.
Let's segregate ourselves.
Yeah.
Let's harvest.
Hey, if you guys are enjoying this episode, please make sure you subscribe to my YouTube if you haven't yet. Follow along for all of the coming episodes. I have a bunch of guests lined up. It's going to be awesome. I always aim to bring conversations that just get down to truth and share information that is what I believe so vital and so important to everybody. And it's just that. It's truth. And it doesn't matter who it offends. It doesn't matter who it, quite frankly, who's happy about it. I don't care. It's just about knowing the truth. And that's what you're going to get here. The good, honest conversations and some of the most valuable and important information I think we need at this time and age, especially. So please subscribe to my YouTube and make sure that you also support my guests, follow them any way you can. And just appreciate you guys.
This energy, because there's gonna be anti-Semitism no matter what, because we understand that Gentiles find us to be intolerable. So let's lean into that energy. Let's harvest that energy and build our own Jewish state. And interestingly, there were many proposals for different Jewish states by many of the great powers.
Mm-hmm.
Russia had an idea, UK had an idea, the United States had
Do you
an
know
idea.
them all?
I don't remember all of them, but in the United States, Niagara Falls, the region around Niagara Falls was presented as a possible Jewish state. Russia actually has a Jewish state. It exists right now. And oddly enough, it has its own flag, and its flag is a rainbow. So that should tell you where the pride flag come from.
Wait, really?
Yeah, there's a Jewish.
What's it called?
I don't remember the name because it's a difficult Russian name, but you can find it easily.
Can you type this in? Type in Russian Jewish state.
Basically, all the Jews that live there left to go to Israel, but it still exists. It's actually still active.
The Jewish Autonomous Oblast, is that it? Is a Jewish territorial formation in Russia established in 1934 in the Far East, located near the border with China. It was intended to be a Jewish homeland within the Soviet Union.
And look up its flag.
With
That's really gonna trip you up.
Birobidizin as its capital. Hold on. The Soviet government established the JAO in 1934 to create a national homeland for Soviet Jews as an alternative to Palestine. The region was intended to, but I thought Palestine didn't exist. The region was intended to provide a territory where Jews could pursue cultural autonomy within a socialist framework with Jewish settlers sent from cities and villages.
Right.
Okay, now what is it?
So they were given their
Type
own
in the
country.
flag. Holy crap.
Isn't that something?
No way.
Telling you they infiltrate everything.
Hold on. That's the original? That's
To my
before.
knowledge. And you saw when it was founded. That's something, right?
Dude, that's crazy.
Yeah.
The autonomous blessed flag consists of a rainbow on a white background with 7 narrow horizontal colored stripes: red, orange, yellow, green, sky blue, blue, and purple. The colors are slightly different from the basic spectral colors, with gold and pace of yellow. The number of colors is meant to symbolize the 7-branch Jewish menorah. The flag's aspect ratio. The 7 colored stripes are centered vertically, blah, 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 blah. The rainbow flag designed and adopted 27 October 1996. What?
And I'm pretty sure that's when it was officially adopted. It was probably unofficially adopted a long time before that.
Hold on, good.
That was the case with a lot of things.
In 2013, the flag was checked according to the Russian gay propaganda law for the presence of gay propaganda. Because of its resemblance of the rainbow LGBT flag, the JAO flag was confirmed as safe because of its white background, white borders between the colored stripes. However, there are gay pride flags that use the 7 colors of the JAO flag. In 2022, the governor of the Jewish Autonomous Oblast, Rostislav Goldstein, stated that the flag depicts a biblical symbol and has nothing in common with the LGBTQ flag.
It is a biblical symbol. The rainbow is a biblical symbol.
That is crazy.
Yeah, I know. It is crazy.
This
whole history is crazy.
Dude,
I honestly believe that to understand the state of the world today, especially in the United States, understanding the history of Jews and Christians is the most important historical theme. Because if you don't understand that, you can't understand the United States. because the United States has been so infiltrated by Jews and by Israeli interests, like at the highest levels, and it has been for over 100 years. It's impossible to understand that if you don't understand the history of Jews and Christians. They've been in conflict for 2,000 years. In fact, I frequently call it the 2,000-year war. I want to write a book called The 2,000-Year War. It's a project that I have. And I just want to talk about the conflict between Judaism and Christianity. But Christians aren't aware that this conflict exists. That's the big problem.
They're going to be now. So go back to what you were talking about, the difference between, because this is something I don't think a lot of people understand, and I don't understand. Reformed versus Orthodox.
Yeah. So
in the different, like we were talking about the different types within the religion.
In the late 1800s, you have that, this sort of, it's like an untenable situation in Europe. And what's really interesting, so thank God that while I was doing all this research, the sort of Google Translate and other translation apps started to come out. So I was able to find sources in French, in German, in different languages that would be considered to be anti-Semitic sources. But I was able to translate them using Google Translate and read a lot of stuff that was really mind-blowing. So there's a very extensive history, but a lot of that history is never translated into English. And it makes sense when you realize that for the most part, publishing in the United States and also in the UK for many centuries, going all the way back to the early 1900s or late 1800s, has been dominated by Jews. So if they choose what's translated, they're not going to choose to translate anything written in French or German that's going to make them look or sound bad.
And that's true. Like, what are the major publishing, I guess?
One of my favorite sources is a German source called Jewish Business Practices.
No. I mean, like, you're saying that the American publishing sources are mainly Jewish.
Oh, I mean, that's widely known. Just like how Hollywood is kind of like,
What are the main ones? Like Oxford? What are
well, what would be more important is to know what the main ones were back then, but I can't recite them off the top of my head. But it's pretty widely acknowledged. That
I know. I know for a fact that like
position.
Oxford with the Schofield Bible and everything. Like I know the history of that.
Right.
Interesting. Okay. Anyway, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. So anyway, I think we were talking about the sort of difference between
the difference in the religion.
Yeah.
Because you're saying it's not fair to say that it's just one. Like you're saying there's a lot of different versions.
So in the late 1800s, because there's all over Europe, from Russia all the way to the UK and France, there's just problems with Jews. And that's why the idea of the Jewish question came about. The concept of the Jewish question,
but it came from Jews.
The phrase was originally published by a Jewish writer, like a Jewish political writer, and then it became sort of like the common, it entered the language. But the Jewish question ultimately came: what are we going to do about the Jews? Because Jews, it is an untenable situation, especially because Jews had become so powerful by that time. I don't know if you know this, but in basically all of Europe, it was illegal for Jews to have a lot of positions that had wealth or influence associated with them.
When was that?
It was for most of history up until about 1800.
It was illegal.
Yes. So Jews weren't able to operate in like media, in the press. They weren't able to operate in a lot of business.
According to who?
They weren't various state law. And after it was, I'm pretty sure it was Napoleon, after the French Revolution. Napoleon came about 10 years after the Revolution, I think, maybe longer. But anyway, it was around that time that there was the Jewish emancipation. So the emancipation of Jews came in the very early 1800s. And that was a big event because from that point forward in France, and eventually it kind of spread to other places, but Jews, after many centuries of being intentionally kept out of being able to have these positions of influence, now they're able to get into it. And they poured into them. Jews poured into the press. They poured into business administration. They poured into government administrative jobs. And Jews, for all of history, have helped each other out. They always help each other up, and then they pull the ladder up after them. This is a pattern that they've always had, and they know that they have it. So by the end of the 1800s, all of a sudden, in France, in Germany, in Austria, in Hungary, in the UK, all over Europe, everyone's realizing Jews have tremendous wealth and power. And no one ever voted for that. No one ever signed up for it. Hardly anybody even noticed it was happening. But suddenly all the newspapers are owned by Jews. All the banks are owned by Jews. Most of the people in government administrative offices were Jews. And they were able to push their agenda. So in the second half of the 1800s, some historians used to call it the Jewish century. because Jews had gone from being basically pushed out of all of European civilization to damn near controlling it in less than 1 century. So there are some historians at that time that used to call the 1800s the Jewish century. Or some people call it the age of the Rothschilds, because central banking was a really big thing too. So anyway, by the end of that, there's a lot of European pushback. There was basically a kind of awakening, a sort of great awakening moment in the 1800s among European Gentiles. And a lot of people, despite the fact that they're in different languages and different cultures and different nations and different empires, they're all saying, what are we going to do with all of these Jews that have become so wealthy and so powerful and own so much of Europe? Because that's a big problem if you're a European. And despite the fact that different European states and empires had their beef with each other, all of them had a tremendous penetration of Jews into the controlling aspects of their various, nations or empires. So there's a whole lot of pushback at this time. And the Jews themselves, to a large extent, want to solve this problem themselves because they don't want to get kicked out. Why? Because they've already been kicked out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, and they're very well aware of this. So to prevent from being kicked out, they want to kind of solve the Jewish question on their own. And there were these different, so Reform Judaism was one of these movements to basically, let's be more Gentile. Let's not dress the way we dress and act the way we act and have our various types of our different rituals and stuff that Gentiles find so horrible. Let's get rid of that part so the Gentiles will accept us more and let us be. That way we can stay here and make money. And to a large extent, that was kind of like the foundation of the Reform movement.
So I actually just fact checked the question, the thing about the Jewish question, because I was really interested. But see if you can pull this up on here though, because it's on my phone. Pull up ChatGPT and just type in. What did I type in? Just type in, where did the statement "the Jewish question" originate from? And if it gives you the same answer, this is dude. It's because I want people to know, like, this is just truth. Like, I'm pulling this up. This is not like,
it's well documented. It's just not part of our narrative.
Yeah. So here you go.
Yeah.
The phrase "the Jewish question" in German did not originate with the Nazis. It is much older, emerging in the 18th and early 19th century Europe during debates about the legal and social status of Jewish people.
Right.
The earliest known uses appear in German-speaking Europe, the 1700s, 1800s. And it literally talks about all the times it was used. And then it says, originally the Jewish question referred to whether Jews have equal rights, how Jewish communities should fit into European nation states. Exactly what you're saying.
Right.
Everything you're saying. And then it says it was turned, and the Germans are the ones that eventually turned it into the final solution to the Jewish question.
Right.
And that's where it became.
And that was never the Holocaust either.
And that became the whole like basis of the thing. But it originally started out, like you said, way before that.
Yes. So
way before that. And it wasn't a malicious thing.
No.
It was literally
because both Jews and Gentile Europeans were asking.
They were all asking the same question. It was literally a socio-political question that they were trying to figure out because of
one of the most important socio-political questions of the 1800s was the Jewish question. Yeah.
Crazy.
It's almost a defining question of that century.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And if you want to talk about Hitler, when Hitler comes about, he's the last in a long line of German thinkers that would be considered Volkisch thinkers. We would translate it to basically conservative thinkers, German conservative thinkers. There were many going all the way back until the late 1800s or to the mid 1800s that had understood that Germany in particular had a very strong culture. Germans had a strong culture, and Germany wasn't actually a nation until 1876. That's something important. But because they had their own strong sort of Gentile Christian culture, but they also had a very strong and very powerful Jewish influence in Germany, it was a big problem in Germany. Now, it was a problem in every European country, the sort of conflict between Gentiles and Jews. But in Germany, there was quite a strong movement to push back on it. And there were many different people who had different ideas about that and different solutions. And not all of them were bad. Some of them would be considered to be very moderate and very progressive.
And you're not lying, because we're looking at it. It's right here.
They would even be acceptable today.
Like, this is well-researched, well-documented. It is 100% the truth that everybody had this same question. This whole idea of the Jewish question was not an anti-Semitic thing.
No.
It was literally
Because Jews were also asking the same question.
they were asking the question themselves.
Right.
So this was, what do we do
Right.
about the fact that the cultures are so polar opposite?
Yes.
And
they
how do
can't
we-
coexist.
Yeah.
And they still can't coexist.
Dude, that's crazy. That's something that I definitely did not know. And I would
Most-
imagine
very, very
many
few people know this, yeah.
Yeah, that's because I literally thought that came straight from the Nazis. That was their thing. They created that. And that's been, for the longest time, that has been like the number one thing that is used when it comes down to anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And it makes complete sense.
Yeah. So the Nazis, so basically Hitler and the Nazi movement was really the last in a very long succession of attempts to answer the Jewish question.
But not in a malicious way.
No, most of them were not malicious.
Like these we're looking at right now. These were not malicious things.
Right.
Like this was literally a socio-political movement throughout all of Europe, including Jews,
Yeah, they were critiqued.
that were just simply saying,
exactly. It's like the same way like today in the UK, there
which
might
makes
be
sense
people
why
who,
there was a push for a Jewish state.
yeah,
It makes complete sense. And it
Yeah.
wasn't just because of, so this is, I mean, this is what they mean when they say that all the anti-Semitism in Europe was causing the need for a Jewish state. It wasn't necessarily malicious anti-Semitism. It was just the fact that
it's just
all
incompatibility.
of them were asking how, like, yeah, okay.
They're not compatible. They can't coexist. And
Simply because of values.
Judaism, yes.
And Jews themselves
more
don't
than
want
values,
to.
behavior.
And
It's
Jews
behavior.
themselves don't want to coexist.
No.
They choose to have their own
Well, they
nation.
want to coexist generally insofar as they can exploit.
But
So
I,
if they,
and I,
if
and
they
I
can
think
live
what
in
I'm re-
Gentile
and I-
society in a power position and exploit it, then they're
Well, and I think what I'm
are
referring
comfortable
to
with
is the state of Israel. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the state of Israel, the nation political state of Israel, does not want to coexist. It's one of the most nationalistic states
Yeah.
that exists.
that. Yeah, it's pretty. It can get pretty extreme.
I mean, they have other cultures there, right? Like they have Arabs, they have Christians.
They claim to. They don't treat them very well.
Yeah, well, I
It's
mean,
mostly a propaganda narrative.
I just made the video about freaking the tradition of spitting on Christian pastors or whatever, and that was wild. Like that's not a lie. They literally confirmed it.
right.
Ben Gvir supports it. He says that he openly supports it. It's just it's a Jewish tradition.
Yeah. Right.
Wild, dude.
So
Anyway,
they
go
they
back
don't
to, like,
coexist. They don't want to coexist. They can't coexist. And Gentiles know this, and Jews know this at this time period.
during the 1800s.
During especially the late 1800s, it's reaching a boiling point. In the late 1800s, it's reaching a boiling point to where something has to be
for
done
everyone.
for everyone.
That's
in
what I
Europe.
want to make sure
all
that
of
everybody
Europe, yes.
understands as we watch this.
Yeah.
Or as you watch and listen to this. It's
And in
not
some places, it's more extreme than others. In Russia, it's a very big problem. In Germany, it's a very big problem. In France, not so much. In France, they had been able, but also there's the difference between Sephardic Jews and Ashkenazi Jews. Sephardic Jews primarily came from Spain, where they were concentrated in the 1400s and prior to that. And
is the ethnicity
Ashkenazis
the only thing that separates the two?
there is kind of Ashkenazis, it's really interesting. In sources in the late 1800s, there's actually a physical description that is made by different scholars and stuff, talking about how the sort of physical racial differences between Ashkenazi Judaism or Jews and Sephardic Jews. So they look differently. And generally speaking, the Sephardic Jews they're more amenable to coexisting with Gentiles.
Okay.
So they're all Jews. They have their own Jewish religion and everything. But the Sephardic, they get along with Gentiles generally better. The Ashkenazis do not. They do not want to coexist. They have a lot of contempt. They exclude themselves. It's just in that Eastern European region for many centuries, they had just evolved a culture where they do not want to coexist with Gentiles. They're choosing. Now, of course, we're always hearing that there is a lot of sort of racism and, exclusion and anti-Semitism. So the narrative we hear is that they're being pushed out, but they very much wanted to live in their own quarters. Later on, these quarters will be called Jewish ghettos, and it's basically just trying to make Europeans feel guilty. But they very much opted to live on their own.
They chose to do that.
Very much so. Very much so.
Where's
And they even created their own language. That's where Yiddish comes from, is basically from the Ashkenazi. It's kind of a gibberish language that's composed of Hebrew intermixed with a bunch of Eastern languages. And it was primarily used as a code so they could talk without anybody understanding them.
is there anything that that you know of that explains that proves that they themselves wanted to be in their own places, and specifically like what we always hear about the Jewish ghettos or whatever?
Yeah, you can. There's various sources that are pretty obscure stuff, but stuff from like the sort of late medieval sources all the way up until the 1800s. There's various opportunities for them to live elsewhere, but they generally choose not to. They want to live in their own communities with each other, and I mean, still to this day,
Mainly Ashkenazis.
I mean, I mean, all Jews. I think it's kind of obvious that for the most part, Jews like to live amongst each other. And you could even say, well, don't all races and all religions? Yeah, but I mean, it's not that.
Well, and I don't
weird.
think there's anything wrong with that.
No, I don't either.
Like that's, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything.
But if they can twist the narrative and say, oh, we're always being kicked out and we're always being forced to live on the fringes of the cities, and we're always experiencing anti-Semitism. But at the same time, when they have freedom of movement, they choose to live in places like New York or Beverly Hills or wherever they have their enclaves. And it was the same way back then. It was the same way back, all the way back in going back many centuries in Europe. So there's a lot of narrative shifts that take place, right?
So you said Sephardic Jews are more the type that like can coexist with Gentiles and want to, like,
generally speaking, they generally get along better, whereas the Ashkenazis are more hostile towards Gentiles.
So is it mainly Sephardic Jews?
And they look different.
So is it mainly Sephardic Jews in the United States of America then? Because I feel like for the most part.
And at this point, there's been so much kind of blending. I mean, what I'm talking about is kind of like 1700s,
this
1800s
is just okay.
Europe.
So basically don't make that comparison yet. We're just talking about the
because there's been a
1800s.
lot of racial mixing since then.
Yeah, okay.
It has.
But back then you're saying this is how it was that way. Okay.
Right.
So you have Orthodox, you have Reformed, you have Sephardic, and you have Ashkenazi.
Right. And Sephardic and Ashkenazi are racial distinctions, and Reform and
religious.
Orthodox they're more political.
Okay.
Religiously inspired political movements.
Okay.
So all this is going on in the late 1800s, and there's a lot of conflict as a result. And then of course you have the different Gentile nations, you have kings and empires and statesmen, and you have the Catholic Church, of course, still very powerful at that time, but declining in power. And there's a lot of problems going on in Europe in the late 1800s, a lot of conflict, but a very, very big defining question was what is going to happen with the Jews, because Jews were very powerful. In all places they've ever lived throughout all of history, they've gathered tremendous power.
Why do you think that's the case?
Well, there's a lot in their religion that is very commercial and opportunistic. Getting involved in business is kind of a fundamental part of their religion. Usury is a very, very big part of their religion. And it's kind of a cheat code that they have, because in Christianity, usury is considered to be a sin. In Islam, usury is considered to be a sin. In Judaism, usury is also considered to be a sin, but it's fair game to commit that sin against Gentiles. They don't do it to each other. And that's one of the foundational things about Judaism, where they understand that a lot of things are bad, so they don't do these things to each other, but they do eagerly do them to Gentiles, because they think Gentiles are kind of an inferior group, racially or spiritually, or however they define it. So things that are bad, they will eagerly do it to the out group, which is Gentiles, but for the in-group, they have their own separate moral code, their own separate sort of like rules, and their separate things that they encourage. Like a lot of Jews are very family-oriented, family-oriented.
I know a lot of Jews.
And there's tremendous power that comes from any community that's very strongly family-oriented. There's a lot of power that comes from that.
Yes.
But they also promote feminism. They also promote the LGBT movement. They also promote, they control Hollywood, and they're always promoting divorce and promiscuity and, hookup culture and all these kinds of things. OnlyFans is, run by Jews. Most of the dating apps are run by Jews. Everywhere you look, porn, is everything that's like toxic for a civilization. You're typically going to find a very strong concentration.
And that
of
rabbi
Jews.
just said this, by the way. Like,
yes, he did.
We literally just pulled that video. The rabbi himself who said that, and he's not. It's not like he's some kind of like fringe rabbi that is against Judaism. Like he is very, very Jewish rabbi, and he is straight up saying everything you're saying is the truth.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality that people need to face.
And what Jews don't like, they don't like this being spoken.
Yeah.
But they generally will acknowledge that it is true. There's quite a lot. You can find other Jewish rabbis that say the same thing.
Do you know of any right now off the top of your head?
I can't remember the names. It's not very hard to find.
See if you can find another one. Type in
find rabbis talking about Hitler. You'll find a whole list.
Type in Jewish rabbi talks about.
Just do Jewish rabbi talking about Hitler. You'll find several quotes. There's some really good, really interesting ones. That's a good one. Rabbi talks about Hitler. I don't remember his name, but he's actually a pretty good source. He's charismatic, he's interesting, and he's going to say right here.
Who knows the first two laws that Hitler implemented? Who knows the first two
Oh, I've heard
laws?
this one.
Before the Nuremberg laws. Before that, we're talking about years before it. Hitler first comes into power. What's the first two laws? Okay, I'll save you the time. Rule number one, no more pornography. No more homosexuality. None of that garbage. Not allowed. Berlin, in the 30s, in the 20s, was the Sodom and Gomorrah of the day. Homosexuality, pornography, all the bestiality, all the garbage of the world, that was the capital of the world. He outlawed it. You're no longer allowed, closed all the bars, all the gay clubs, all the production, which were all run by Jewish people, unfortunately. Second rule, you're not allowed to charge interest. No more interest. Now you would think, why? What does he care about interest? Well, because all the people that had the money, that lent the money out, were Jews. He said no more interest. Why? Because of the high interest that the Jews charged people was so high, it ruined, it destroyed the economy in Germany. They destroyed, just like they destroyed Russia a few years before that through their communism over there. Jews destroyed Russia, not Goyim. Jews destroyed. Communism is by Jews. Well, don't let anybody confuse you. You look at history, Karl Marx, all the other Reshaim, they're all Jews. Wicked, but nonetheless Jews. They destroyed Russia, and he wrote in chapter 2 of Mein Kampf, they destroyed Russia, now they're destroying Germany. Go to the store to buy bread, you had to take a whole horse carriage full of money. By the time you arrive at the store, it wasn't enough. Why? Because the inflation rate was so high.
Yeah.
The bread became so much more valuable and your money went down. And at that time, the Great Depression was happening around the entire world. Everyone was in a financial collapse. America was a financial collapse. England was a financial collapse. Germany collapsed worse than everybody else. But after he passed this law, within 6 years, Germany became the leading, wealthiest economy in the world. They called it a financial miracle. Why? They were the only ones that were bold enough to stop interest. This is one of the biggest reasons of why he hated Jews. Because they destroyed the economy because of their greed. This is happening again.
Yeah, I mean they were burning money because it was cheaper than buying firewood.
Right.
I know that. I'm well aware of that.
1933 to 1939.
Yeah, I know that for a fact. So that's okay. So
And we should not think, I've shared this with people and think, oh, he's one of the few like good rabbis. He's not at all. If you look at this guy's other quotes, he's very much a Jewish supremacist. He's very much a radical Zionist.
So he's not somebody that Jews would look at and be like, oh, he's a self-hating Jew.
No, not at all. He has many other clips where he's super anti-Gentile. He's kind of a Jewish, like a radical. But here he is saying this not for the benefit of Gentiles. He's not trying to help Gentiles or get in good with Gentiles. He's speaking to a room full of Jews. May or may not. There's a pretty good chance he had no idea this would become a viral clip many years later. He's just speaking to a room of Jews and trying to, teach them whatever. He's trying to make whatever point he's trying to make.
Do you know what the point was?
I don't know what his point was of that whole sermon. Or I don't think they call it a sermon, but.
Interesting.
There's another one. That one, we can look at that one. That one's in Hebrew, but.
This one's 8 minutes long, though. Yeah, no, let's.
Yeah, point is, there's a lot of examples.
But there's a lot.
It's not hard for people to find if they're interested. There's quite a lot of Jewish rabbis that will acknowledge a lot of the things that I'm telling you here. In fact, Jewish rabbis are many of my best sources. Jewish writings.
Really?
Yeah. That's the basis of the whole Talmud course that we were talking about, is there's a lot of history in it, but chiefly it revolves around the Talmud and what the Talmud is. And of course, the Talmud was entirely written by Jewish rabbis. 6,000 pages written by Jewish rabbis over the course of many centuries. Just the compilation and editing and writing of the Talmud took 7 centuries. And it was an assessment of wisdom that had been passed down for untold thousands of years before that. So it is basically their various rabbis' interpretations of things, but a lot of the things that they came up with were things that we would consider to be very diabolical, very toxic to any Gentile culture, because they view Gentiles as prey, either as enemies or as prey. They either think of them as their actual civilization level enemies, which they're at war in and they have to destroy, or kind of like a herd of livestock they call goyim, which exist to be exploited and used as labor or for charging interest or for whatever means. But they don't believe that by any means that they're on their level.
So why does that? Okay, so why is it that like the whole idea of goy and goyim or whatever? Because the only time that, I'll be honest, the only time that I ever really hear that is with people that are not Jewish. Like
Right.
it's with people that they're not Jewish. They're Christians or whatever. Like I've never really heard Jewish people talk about goyim or goy.
No, they have this like an unspoken rule to not say that in public. There's a lot of duality that needs to be understood with Jews. There's their beliefs that they generally hide, and they have been for many, many centuries, even thousands of years. It's like a code. They have a code that is not unlike a code of like a mafia or something. If they're in the presence of non-Jews, they're going to talk a certain way and they're going to say things in a certain way and they're going to make themselves generally more palatable. Then they have an insider code, and the insider code is different. They have different meanings, different definitions, different terminology that they use. And it's very hard to sort of, flesh that out.
And do all Jewish people believe this, or is it like, because I do know a lot of Jewish people, and like I wonder if it's like any other religion where there's a lot of people that are a part of the Jewish religion that just kind of like are oblivious to this or just kind of float.
Yeah, I think for sure that's the case. I think there's plenty of people who would identify as Jews that are not.
They're just completely
these
oblivious to
diabolical
all
Zionists.
of this.
But if
And
you
this
look at
mainly
people,
comes from Zionism.
I know it definitely more than Zionism.
Okay.
That's something that, so a big part, I've experienced a lot of conflict over this, because you hear a lot of people who they seem to be uncomfortable saying that Jews are the problem. So they're always saying Zionist, 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 and it's more palatable to say the Zionists. But obviously Zionism came from Judaism, right? It's a Jewish movement. Mm-hmm. So it has a spiritual or religious or moral basis in Judaism. That's undeniable, right? So if we look back at it, a lot of the beliefs that are in Zionism, where do they come from? They come from Judaism, and they come from a long line of Jewish beliefs and Jewish rabbis and Jewish rules and what they would call morals. Moral, just the definition of the word moral means something very different for Jews than it means for anybody else. When they're, you know how they say that like the IDF is the world's most moral army?
Yeah.
And yet they're committing genocide and they're shooting kids in the head and stuff like that. So what they consider to be moral,
prisoners.
Right. When they say moral, they mean something radically different.
Really?
They mean, yes, very much so. For them, they use the word moral a lot. This is something, it took me a long time to understand.
What does it mean?
This.
And is it like, is this one of those things too that's like provable? Like you can say like, yeah, this is.
Basically, it means according to their God. So if something is according to their God, it's moral. But their God, the way that they read the Old Testament and the Torah, which they call the Torah, and the Tanakh.
That makes complete sense, because
Right.
if you look at, for example, if they truly look at the Palestinians like they're not people and they're just vermin,
Right.
and they are impeding their ability to have the, their Zionist agenda,
They're in the way.
then they're in the way, and
Right.
then they would
They're in the way, and they're
justify
subhuman, right? They're subhuman. They're not fully human. They're in the way. They're in
so
the
they
way
would
of them
justify
fulfilling their
that.
destiny. So it's moral to wipe
So
them
it's
out.
moral according to their justification, their God,
Right.
and their religion.
Right.
And honestly, that makes complete sense, because that's what my argument has always been. Whenever I get into a conversation with somebody about Zionism,
Right.
I straight up say, Zionism, the reason why I'm so outspoken about Zionism is because it goes against everything Americans believe.
Right.
You are, well, what Americans should believe. You're saying that you're taking away the freedom of another people solely because your God and your religion says you can.
Right.
That is 100% completely against the principles of America and
Right.
what we believe.
And we would say that's immoral.
Exactly.
But they would say,
it's
no,
100%
it's moral.
immoral, because
they would say it's totally moral.
yeah, and it's like, and then I always come back and I'm like, okay, so listen, let's just turn this around and say, okay, so let's just pretend that all of a sudden now the Scientologists rise up and say their God and their scripture says that they get all of California, and anybody in California needs to get out, or we're going to bomb them, and we're going to be
Right.
supported by all the other countries around the world, because our God and our scripture says so. Even though the people in California don't believe in this God or this scripture and
Right.
have no understanding whatsoever of it, it's just how it is. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
That's ultimately what's going on.
Yeah. And that would be considered outrageous.
And it would be unreal. It would be
Yeah.
like you people are psychos.
Right.
And yet this is seen in a wholly different way.
Just
And
because it's Israel.
just because it's Israel and because
Right.
it's Zionism and because there's such an infiltration into our government and our media and everything
And
else
the
in
Bible.
country.
Ultimately, the
And the Bible.
infiltration starts with the Bible.
Yeah, but that actually makes perfect sense as to why
Right.
they legitimately do think they're being moral.
Yes.
Like from their standpoint, they honestly believe that they are the most moral
Yeah.
army in the world.
Right. So we just heard, we know, and we have heard also from the mouths of these various Jewish rabbis that things that are toxic to civilizations, like pushing LGBT,
Yeah, they said it
pushing
themselves.
homosexuality, pushing porn,
Yeah.
pushing all these, like they recognize these are toxic to civilizations, and yet they also recognize that they are being pushed by Jews.
Yeah.
I believe that this has been going on for such a long time, because if they can run those things and push them onto other civilizations, and those civilizations welcome them with open arms, which we have seen in the United States. We have seen a lot of people,
100%.
they've welcomed LGBT, they've welcomed porn,
All of it.
they've welcomed drugs.
It's
yeah.
Porn is like the number one most highest grossing industry like in the country, is it not?
It's not the highest grossing industry, but it's the most profitable.
Yeah.
OnlyFans is the single most profitable most profitable company that in existence by an enormous margin when it is broken down per employee. Because OnlyFans only has like 50 or 60 actual employees because everyone else is a content creator. They are far more profitable. They outdo Apple and Nvidia and all these giant companies by an enormous margin. And the head of that is a Jew who is basically the biggest single donor to Zionist funds in the United States. He's the single biggest donor to IPAC, I'm pretty sure.
I also just saw something crazy the other day. I don't know if we want to pull this up. I saw that a college invited an OnlyFans model to speak to the class about how to be a successful OnlyFans model on social media.
Right. I'd be willing to bet there's a Jew behind it somewhere. So the reason that what I believe is the reason that they push those things is because they are proving that other people are immoral. If they can push that and people receive it, then
it's
they're
proving their point.
It's proving their point
That they are moral and that
right. So they're in a way they're demonstrating that they're morally superior by degenerating everyone else.
Right here. Pull that up. Yeah. So I saw this come up the other day, and OnlyFans star. What does it say? Go to the top. It says OnlyFans star. No, go to they're right there. OnlyFans star Ari Kistia responded to backlash. OnlyFans star preaches to university students as professor says manifestation worked. Whatever that means. So University of Washington, of course it's Washington, professor invited social media personality and OnlyFans star to speak to her students last week, a decision that was defended by both professor and university statements in Fox News Digital. Dr. Nicole McNichols teaches Psych 210, the diversity of human sexuality. What? At the university, it noted the adult content personality understandably sparks mixed reactions in her Instagram post touting the visit November 17th. Our manifestation worked, McNichols posted on Instagram. Yesterday, my class had the chance to hear from the capitals, Ari whatever, someone who understandably sparks mixed reactions, but whose voice and lived experience are essential in any honest conversation about sexuality, labor, and the realities of today's digital landscape. What? Bro, that is insane.
So I think in the way that I read when Israel says that they have the most moral army, I read it more as they are the army that uses morality as a weapon. And they use morality as a weapon against not, Palestine, against the whole world, because they infiltrate and subvert values and culture and morality. And they've been doing it a long time, because we just heard those rabbis talk about how Jews were dominating these industries in Germany, and that was a full century ago. Isn't it strange? Isn't it a weird coincidence that you had all these Jews that were dominating these sort of morally degenerate industries in Germany? And that was nothing new. It wasn't like they all of a sudden did it in Germany. They had been doing it in Europe for a long time.
Yeah.
And then they come over to the United States post World War II, where there was a very huge number of Jews that came over to the United States and got into industries, and where have they concentrated in? They've concentrated a lot in places where they have cultural influence. Hollywood is completely Jew dominated. The music industry is completely Jew dominated. And you can almost trace the history of these industries when they reach a saturation point of Jews is when they start to promote a lot of moral degeneracy. So you can hardly see any movie or any new popular recording artist that's not pushing some kind of moral degeneracy. Like if you listen to songs from like the 50s and 60s, you're going to hear a lot of stuff about love. And you're going to hear stuff about, love and devotion. And, mostly those are like the themes of that time. Then fast forward to the 90s and onwards, you hear all kinds of, it runs the gamut, right? You have drugs, you have gangster stuff, you have all this like, pimps and hoes kind of stuff. And then fast forward, you have a lot of women now talking about having hoes and all this kind of stuff, because women have kind of taken over a lot of that, toxic cultural narrative that was being promoted by men in the 90s. And what happened was Jews took over those industries and started to use them to promote cultural and moral degeneracy. So why is that so consistent? I think it's because they use morality as a weapon. If they can impose a degenerate morality on other people outside of if they can push it on Gentiles, then they're basically proving that they are more moral, because the Gentiles' morality, it collapses under a little bit of Jewish pressure.
So what would the argument to that be? Let's play devil's advocate. What would be the argument and opposed to that? If that's your opinion, what do you think the argument would be against that? That why is it that it is clearly factually it's a fact that these industries are largely dominated by Jewish owners or whatever, like Jewish people own these industries and they largely dominate it.
Yeah.
What would be the argument of why constant promiscuity and immorality is pushed in these industries and things that are counter to culture? What would they say?
So the typical
would
Jewish
it just
answer,
be we're successful?
Yeah, the typical Jewish answer is we work hard. We work harder than anybody else, and we're more innovative.
But how do you justify the immorality? That so immorality sells, so we make more money off that, so we're more successful.
I think what they would probably say. I think what they would probably say is basically that it is these Gentile cultures that want to degenerate morally and culturally. They want it, and they're demonstrating that they want it. And they are simply finding ways to profit off of this cultural degeneration process that's inevitable because they don't have a strong moral foundation. So they're the smart business people who find opportunities, and then they take those opportunities, and don't blame them and don't get mad at them because they are the smart ones. They always consider themselves to be smart. Jews are kind of constantly bragging about how smart they are. That's something very common that goes back a long time. So they'd say, don't blame us for being the smart ones who are finding ways to profit.
I mean, Ben Shapiro says that all the time.
Yeah, of course, it's very common.
Literally all the time.
They can't help it.
He says it all the time.
They can't help it.
We're smart, we're successful.
They can't help it.
We work hard, which, okay, cool. Like your culture, culture promotes hard work and intelligence, and that's great. Those are great things.
They're very influential. Jews are very influential.
But,
so if they are so smart and if they're so hardworking,
why is Rabbi Shmuley building out a sex toy shop with his daughter?
Yeah, it's almost something.
What's that about?
It appears that they can't help it. But if it's true that they're so smart and so successful and so hardworking and so moral, why don't they use all those attributes to promote healthy societies?
Yeah.
But what they do is they promote health in their own community, and they promote cultural and moral rot in surrounding Gentile communities. It's a very common pattern. So they're using moral as a weapon in a civilization level war that they've been in since time immemorial.
Well, and the whole scripture comes to mind, by their fruits ye shall know them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all the things being promoted are definitely not fruits of the Spirit of Jesus Christ.
No.
Or God.
Well, they loathe Jesus Christ.
And that's what I was going to say. So like, again, just based on truth, like it makes sense why that would be the case. Because if you don't believe in Jesus Christ, and if even some of you absolutely hate Jesus Christ,
right?
Well, then why the freak would you care if you're promoting the exact opposite of what he stands for and everybody that believes in him stands for?
Right.
That's not hard to believe that would be the case,
well,
especially if you're successful in making money from it.
Yeah, that's why when people talk about anti-Christian this, anti-Christian that, the most fundamentally anti-Christian religion in all of history is Judaism.
Well, yeah, because they don't believe in Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
I've
they completely reject Jesus
I've talked
Christ.
about
They
this.
perceive him as a spiritual enemy.
Yeah,
Yeah. And what I find to be really interesting is in the Talmud, you have a very different narrative than in the Christian narrative about how Jesus, his demise, basically. Because in the Christian narrative, he was put on a cross, right? And basically it was the Jews who more or less plotted along with the Romans to get him to be brought to justice.
Well, and we believe that.
Right. So
I mean, we believe that the Jews, the Pharisees and the Sadducees ultimately were who called him a blasphemer, and
Right.
basically we're trying to figure out how do we get rid of this guy,
Right.
because he's going against all of our traditions and he's a complete heretic.
Right.
And then they ultimately got the Romans to kill him.
Right.
I mean, because Pontius, no, not Pontius,
Pontius Pilate.
But who was the one that was it? Pontius Pilate, who basically said like, I see no fault in this man. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Because he knew that there was nothing. He knew that he was innocent.
Right.
But he was basically forced to do it by the
Right.
people who.
And what's interesting is in the Talmud, you have a very different narrative. So in the Talmud, they don't want to, because they have this whole Jewish supremacy idea that permeates their entire religion and all of their history. They don't want to, because remember, they're in the middle of a war against Rome. And Rome is their most proximate enemy at this time. They are in a lengthy war, and there's a large civil war component in this war against Rome. And then Jesus
you're saying Judaism in Rome.
Judea versus Rome is a large scale war that is happening. Rome was able to basically take over Judea, but not subdue it, because it was a continuous, basically the earliest terrorism, political terrorism. Terrorism to a very large extent is Jewish. So they had these continuous sort of like a resistance. They had militia resistance. They had terrorists. They had assassins. The Sicario, the idea of a Sicario, that actually comes from a Jewish word. So there was a continuous resistance movement. And in the midst of this resistance pops up Jesus, this sort of a spiritual revolt against Judaism. He's kind of you could say a Jewish reformer of some type. And that's the last thing that the Jewish resistance needs at this point in time, is one of their own coming up with basically a new religion that is trying to reform this religion that, he says are bad, and he calls them the synagogue of Satan and so on. So what they don't want to do in their historical narrative is give the power and the authority of governance to Rome. Because if it is legitimate that Rome brought Jesus to justice and executed him under Roman law, that means they're consenting to the idea that Rome had authority at that time, and they don't want to do that. So in their own narrative, it was Jews themselves, the Jewish rabbinical, they have a word for it that I don't remember at the time, but it was basically their sort of like tribunal, like a tribunal council. They were the ones who brought Jesus to justice, tried him, convicted him completely under Jewish law. So he is a Jew subject to Jewish law. He went through the whole proper procedure of Jewish law. He was convicted under Jewish law, and then he was executed under Jewish law by Jewish executioners, not on a cross, but by stoning. So it's even a different mechanism of death in the Talmud. And the reason is because they want to.
But how do they do that if it's well known that that's not the case?
Well, they would say it's not well known. They would say that the sort of Christian narrative is false, as they would with everything else Christianity, right?
I've never heard a Jewish person say that Jesus Christ wasn't crucified, though. That's why
I mean, it's in the Talmud. There's an entire book about it called Jesus in the Talmud, written by I think he's a Jewish scholar. It's quite a good book.
I mean, okay, so let's back up a little bit, because that is something I also wanted to talk about, is the Talmud, because I feel like, again, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like anytime I see stuff about the Talmud, it's always like very bombastic, very just like sensational stuff. That's like, it seems to me like it's just low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And it almost makes the argument worse. It almost makes it almost makes the whole idea of anti-Semitism, it gives it even more power, because it just seems like it's like, that's just low hanging fruit for people to grasp on and say, that's not proven, or that's not this, or whatever.
Right.
Explain the difference between the Talmud and the Torah,
right,
and how it actually exists within Judaism, and like explain those things for people, because I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand as well. And
For
talk
sure.
about the nuance of it as well. You know what I mean? Like what can you tell us about that?
There is a lot of nuance. So as I was doing this whole journey, and as you know, I'm very, very big on like academic level research. I like to go
Yes.
really, really deep, and I don't make any claims that are opinion based. I make only claims that can be backed up by this evidence, and I've gathered a lot of it.
Yeah. So if you're
once
watching this right now and you're thinking this guy's full of crap, let me know and I'll put you in touch with him. You can debate him. Good
Please
luck.
debate me. Yeah. So the Talmud is something that started to come up a lot with these little quotes, like these little verses that are cited, and they sound diabolical. And a lot of them sound unbelievable, right?
Yeah, that
So-
Jesus is burning in excrement and all the other stuff that I've heard. Yeah.
Well, that part is true.
I know that that's a
But
real
there's-
thing, but
yeah.
like that's
What
all
they
the
do
stuff
is-
that they always use.
What I dislike is that they will basically, there's a lot of Talmudic quotes that people will post on social media to
Yes.
try to, it's like they're trying to prove that Jews are bad because this stuff is in the Talmud. And a lot of those quotes that are very common are fabricated. You can't find them, and they don't exist. But a lot of them are basically paraphrases of things that do exist. So there might be a whole paragraph saying something, and then it's a paraphrasing. Now, if you can take the spirit of a paragraph and it sounds like it's super, Jewish supremacist and anti-Gentile, but you boil it down to a sentence, and then hundreds of thousands of people are posting that on social media,
You're killing your argument.
you're kind of killing your argument, right? Because you're basically saying you're getting all these people to promote something that technically isn't true. It might be true in spirit.
but it doesn't matter
but-
because you're basically telling everybody this is all I have.
Exactly.
This isn't factual based research,
Right.
but it's all I have, and so
Right.
share it and
I
prove
saw
my
someone
point.
else post it, so no, I'm
even
gonna
though my
post it.
point's wrong.
Exactly.
And that's one of the things I always try to make sure I don't do.
Same
And
with
so
me.
that's why this
I'm
is
very,
important.
very, I'm very insistent about fact
Like
checking
it's
the
truth.
crap out of
is
everything.
it truth?
Right.
Okay, talk about it.
Now, some of those Talmud quotes are totally legitimate, and that's what that is basically the origin point. Everything we're talking about here, this is the origin point of why I ended up doing a whole course about it. And the course is like 130 pages, and I wrote everything. So what I started doing was I said I have to look at the Talmud itself, and I have to do a lot of fact checking to see if what I'm reading is even the Talmud, because a modern day version of the Talmud you find on the internet has probably been translated and manipulated in some way. So there's got to be some leeway there. But I wanted to find all these quotes because there's dozens of them that circulate around the internet. I wanted to find some, and I say, okay, I'm going to look these up myself, and I'm going to read them, and I'm also going to read around them. I'm going to read what came before it and what came after that to try to put it into context. Some of these things, there's no question about it. They are definitely promoting these diabolical points of view. Other things, there's some nuance there because it's maybe not quite as bad as you say, but it's still bad. And some of them are outright fabrications. And I did go into that a lot in that course. That's why I wrote that course, because I want to
Can you
give
give
the
some
nuance.
examples off the top of your head? The ones that are constantly circulating that are kind of fabrications, and then the ones that are like those are absolutely real and you backed it up.
I can't think of them at this moment. I did mention some of them in my course, and I have posted a bunch of them on social media over time. But there's the main thing to take from all this is that there is a lot that is in the Talmud, and also not just in the Talmud, but in various rabbinical scripture, because rabbis, they write a lot. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of rabbinical writing.
And that's what the Talmud is, right? The Talmud is
There is
ultimately
that,
just the writings of the rabbis.
Yes, it is. So the Talmud is basically many rabbis' opinions on various parts of the Torah, which is what should be really the Tanakh.
Because
Torah,
that's also an argument that I've heard many times for the
Right.
Talmud, is that the Talmud is just opinion based.
well, it is. That is true. So it's kind of like, have you ever read any Supreme Court decisions?
Yeah.
If you read Supreme Court decisions, they're sort of complex and they're lengthy and they're legal and whatever. But you also have a dissenting opinion. So you usually have the majority opinion, and the closest you can get is 5-4, right? So when there's a 5-4 decision, it's usually controversial because you have the majority. 5 judges agreed that this is going to be the majority opinion, but 4 of them, which is very close, they had a different idea and they write the minority opinion. So there's one that becomes dominant, but there's also a different way of looking at it, and that sort of deserves to be studied. The Talmud is like a whole huge book of that for the most part. Different, because for the most part in Judaism, rabbis are judges because their whole thing is based on what they consider to be the law, God's law. The law is of foundational importance in all of Judaism. So there's all these rabbis, which are basically like
Ultimately,
judges.
the law of Moses
Yes.
is what we're talking
Right,
about. Yeah.
Mosaic law.
Right.
So you have all these rabbis, which are the same as judges, who are sort of pitching in and giving their idea. But a lot of things, like what it involves one of the most diabolical things in the Talmud. I'm just going to go into it, is the whole pedophilia aspect of it, right? That is a part of the Talmud. That is discussed in the Talmud, and it is permitted in the Talmud. There are dissenting opinions of it, but they're technical. So it's not saying, no one's standing up and saying, hey, this is wrong. The idea of pedophilia is absolutely wrong. Instead, what they have is saying, well, there's some technicalities here. Maybe it's this age that's permitted. Maybe it's that age, or maybe under these conditions, or maybe under those conditions. So no one's ever saying, no, this is absolutely morally wrong. So are there dissenting and, various opinions? Yes. But are they all also very immoral and diabolical and will be considered to be awful to like anybody with a conscience? Also, yes. So that's what, and you find that a lot in the Talmud.
But how much is the Talmud actually used within Judaism versus the Torah? You know what I mean?
It's foundational. It's absolutely foundational.
Because the times that I've said something, I've had people who are Jewish have come into my like DMs or whatever and just been like, just so you know, the Talmud isn't something that really we ever use.
Yeah.
That's always what I've heard. So if that, like, are they just lying? Or are they kind of, or do you think they're just kind of those part of the group that's just oblivious to this?
Yeah, I mean, of course, like Jews, like any other group, are going to run the gamut, right? There's going to be a lot of people who are ethnic Jews that aren't practicing religion at all.
And would you say there's a
count
lot
as Jews? Yeah,
more
sure.
of those than not?
Well, I think a lot of those would say, I've never even heard of the Talmud, and this is BS, and I don't want to get lumped into all this. And fair point. I mean, maybe if they're being characterized in that way because and they individually have never had anything to do with it, that's a fair point. But the history of Judaism is very, very heavily based on the Talmud. It is a basis for their culture, for their morality, for their worldview, for a lot of their historical, political opinions. I mean, it is the most important work. It's the most foundational work in the history of all of Judaism, which is a several thousand-year-old religion.
But at this point, what percentage would you say, or how many people actually still look at it that way, modern day? I think that's an important distinction to make.
Yeah, only a small number. Well, so let's say only a very small number do. That would basically be like the very orthodox,
right?
Torah
Because that's
scholars,
the argument, right?
Right.
The argument
Yes.
is always a very small number of us even look at that as
sure. They would say, look, you're only talking about the really zealous, really like radical,
Yes.
ultra religious Orthodox
Yes.
people, and most of them are like that. But you're also saying, like, can we acknowledge that there is like the idea of Jewishness exists? There is a Jewish culture. There's a Jewish way of life. There's a Jewish worldview, generally speaking. Where does that come from? I mean, to a large extent, it comes from the wisdom that has been passed down for many centuries that was concentrated in the Talmud. Because at one point in time, after the diaspora, after basically Judea was reduced to rubble and the surviving Jews were scattered all over the old world by the Romans, the only thing they had to unite them as a people was the remnants of their book. And for the next 700 years, you had rabbinical scholars who were all getting together to compile the remnants of their wisdom, to write them down, to edit them, to put them together into one overarching work. And that work ultimately became the Talmud. And there were two separate attempts at that. There was the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud, which is definitely more diabolical. And it should be telling that the more diabolical of the two became the dominant one. The Jerusalem one kind of just fell away.
So in what way is the Talmud used nowadays? Like that you know of? I mean, like who still uses it? Who still promotes it? Because I feel like I've never seen it used or promoted other than by people who aren't Jewish.
No, you won't. Yeah. So, I mean, definitely like people who are religious Jews, Orthodox Jews, rabbis, Torah scholars, like the schools. And I have a whole section talking about that, about their schools, which are called yeshivas. I talk about that in the Talmud course because it is important to understand that they do study this to this day. The very religious ones do. And it is very, very challenging study. And that is also why Jews tend to excel in any field that requires a lot of study or a lot of reading or writing or critical thinking. A lot of lawyers are Jewish. A lot of people who are involved in, very complex thinking, complex writing. A lot of people in the press and media and authors, and a lot of them are Jews. They tend to excel at this. But that's because they're to a very large extent, their whole history is based on the reading and writing and study and critique of their law and the analysis of that law, which is the Torah and the Talmud. It really should be the Tanakh and the Talmud. So that just to make the distinction, the Torah is the first 5 books of the Old Testament.
Right.
The Tanakh is basically the wider Old Testament with all the books, and there's a little bit of variance there in what the books are and whatnot. But the Talmud is an analysis of the Tanakh. It's an analysis of the Old Testament by the rabbis, but by rabbis that lived over the course of like over 1,000 years. It's a compilation. So you might have one rabbi that lived many centuries ago that's chiming in on a part of, like a fundamental part of Scripture. Something from Genesis or something from Exodus or something from Deuteronomy, right? They analyze the crap out of it. So you have one rabbi that wrote something, but you have another rabbi writing sort of an alternate opinion on it centuries later, but it's almost like they're having a discussion. So if you're a modern day Torah scholar reading this in a yeshiva, you're like a 14-year-old Jewish kid, you're reading what a rabbi said 2,000 years ago, and then another rabbi said in response back in the early Middle Ages, and then what another rabbi said later. And then there's a bunch of scholarship that comes after that, like Maimonides. Maimonides is a very, very important scholar in that. This is who Ben Shapiro is always talking about. It's like his version of Judaism is based on Maimonides, and he existed, I believe, in the 1200s. He would not be considered a Talmud scholar, but he's one of the most important Jewish scholars in history.
Is that the dude that there's the picture of him that's behind Netanyahu or whatever, and all those, you know what I'm talking about?
That I don't know.
There's like that famous, there's a picture of a famous rabbi, and I think he's always behind Netanyahu, or maybe he's in like White House in Washington. I can't remember. I don't know. I've seen it a couple times, but according to everybody that posts that, whenever I've seen it posted, he is one of those like Talmud rabbinic Jews.
Yeah, so
I can't remember what his name is.
The Talmud was officially, its sort of compilation finished up in like the 7th century, I believe. So anybody who comes after that wouldn't be considered a Talmudic scholar, but they still could be very, very important Jewish scholars. So Maimonides is a very important Jewish scholar, but he's not in the Talmud necessarily, but he wrote a whole bunch of analysis of the Talmud. So as a modern day, if you're a student of all this, you're going to be reading the book of the law itself, which would be the Torah, right? The original Mosaic law. You're going to be reading Talmudic analysis, and then you're going to be reading separate analysis of this from rabbis that came much later. I mean, that's going to make you a pretty smart cookie, right? And that's good. That is to their credit. They're very, very good readers, and they're very good thinkers, and they tend to be very good writers and very good verbal communicators. That's to their credit. But overarching, their moral code throughout all of that stuff is based on fundamental racial and spiritual supremacy for them. They believe they are chosen. They believe they're better than every other race and every other religion, and the rest of the world is Gentiles, or worse. A Gentile is, basically a non-Jew, but they believe some Gentiles are useful, and they believe others should basically be wiped off the face of the earth because they're Jewish enemies.
Yeah, and I mean that's another thing that I don't think people can really argue with. It's just truth. Pull this up real quick. Type in, I think I showed this to you. Did you see the Rappaport video? Type in Michael Rappaport, Chosen Ones, and let's see if that pulls up. This was the craziest video I saw of him, dude. I mean, he's obviously very like sensational too, but
right.
But dude, I mean, it's you gotta see it to believe it. Look up videos. Yeah, this is probably it right here. Pull this up. Any one of those. No, go to the second one. It's probably fine. It'll probably still open. Just open that one up. Turn it up. Oh wait, no, this isn't it. No, this isn't it. Go back. It's the first one. Pull up the first one. The first one. The very first one. Nope. Next one. That one. Pull up that one. It'll still open up. Just close that out. There you go. Turn it up. Yeah. Start it over.
Yo, Jewish people are the chosen people. We Jewish people are the chosen people. But just because you're not Jewish doesn't mean you're not dope. Doesn't mean you're not fantastic. Doesn't mean you're not brilliant. Doesn't mean you don't have all the rights, capabilities.
I'm still dope, bro.
To every single thing that the world offers. You're just not chosen. There's so many other things that you are. You're just not chosen. I don't know why people get so upset because the Jewish people are chosen. We are chosen. Look it up. Google it. Read it. Chat
Google
GPT
it, bro. Google it.
But it doesn't mean you can't be plenty of other fantastic, great adjectives, adverbs,
Oh, good.
pronouns, and nouns. You're just not chosen. Am Israel Chai. 55
Oh, good.
hostages remain in Gaza. 55 hostages
Yeah, all right,
remain
we can turn
in
it off
Gaza.
now.
Yeah, we get the point.
So, dude, I mean, we're not chosen,
that-
but we're still dope.
No, the idea of
you're definitely
chosenness,
dope.
That's probably the most fundamental single belief in all of Judaism. They're chosen and everyone else isn't. Almost everything stems from that. And that means what they do is right and what everybody else does is wrong. And it almost doesn't matter what they do.
And that is
By being
literal
chosen,
supremacy.
That's the foundation of
It's
Jewish
everything
supremacy.
that we're told we're not supposed to be
Right.
part of. It's
Yeah, but
everything that I'm called
The
every
rules
day.
don't apply to them because they're chosen.
Yeah.
Or different rules apply to them.
It's the idea that you're better than other people because of your race and your ethnicity, your religion, and literally that is the fundamental thing that people like you and me and anybody else that's speaking about this stuff is attacked for.
Right.
And yet,
There you have it.
like, what?
But that should really speak to how successfully they've infiltrated not just the media, not just the education, not just academia, not just not government, but the literal mindset of the entire West. Because nobody bats an eyelash when Jews openly proclaim how special they are, how powerful they are, how exceptional they are.
A lot of them support it.
A lot of people support
especially
it.
Christian Zionists.
Now, if you had a white person saying this exact same thing about white people, they would be attacked as a neo-Nazi or whatever, and they'd be slandered. But it's almost like everyone just collectively says, well, yeah, I mean, he's kind of right. He's kind of, I mean, Jews are special.
Okay, so
They're
now
different.
where does that bring that home? Where does that come from?
Where is that? Well, like I said, it comes from the oldest foundational text, which is the Torah.
But how did it make its way to the point where we are at now, where
the Bible, the Old Testament. One of the most perplexing things to
the
me,
Judeo-Christianity thing?
Yeah, one of the most perplexing things to me is that Jesus came about. However, whatever technicalities about Jesus and his word and what happened with his life, those aside, generally speaking, Jesus came about with a message and a description of the idea of God and who's included in the covenant of God that was very different from what predated it, which is the Jewish idea.
You're talking about the Abraham, the promise to Abraham to his sons.
Right. When Jesus comes along, it's very different. He presents a very different idea, right?
Yeah, he says, I am the law. I came to fulfill the law.
Right. And then he opens up the covenant to not just Jews. He's basically saying
everyone.
It's not just for this one race.
Basically, anybody that follows him.
Right.
Anybody that follows Jesus Christ,
right.
They are now the chosen people. Right. They are now he basically came and squashed the old law. That's ultimately what happened. He came and he said, listen, you guys are doing what you did before, but like this is a new thing now.
Yeah, whole new rules.
And that's why they hated him. That's why they said that he was a false prophet.
Right.
To this day.
Yeah.
But
and somewhere along the way, Christians decided to take the Jewish foundational text, which is the Old Testament.
Where did that happen?
It happened pretty quickly. I'm pretty sure that the Apostle Paul was the first person who kind of blended these two things and basically said, well, there's a lot in the Old Testament and the New Testament that kind of can coexist. So, we can mash these things together. And from that point on, more or less, the Old Testament and New Testament kind of get lumped in together. And to this day, they're still just called the Bible. But the Jews, they do not recognize the New Testament. They reject all of it.
Yeah.
But then you have Christians who they basically accept that the Jewish Bible, which is the Tanakh or the Old Testament, is, it's the same Bible as the New Testament and it's the same God. And he has different attributes and he kind of took a different form and all this stuff, but it's all the same guy, even though there's many attributes of the way Jesus described God and the way the Old Testament describes God that are fundamentally opposed. At the most fundamental level, these two beings don't share the same attributes. They don't share the same characteristics. They certainly don't share the same morality. But modern day Christians, they take both of these books and mash them together and they do a bunch of mental gymnastics to try to make sense of all that. But basically God is this complex character that we can't fully make sense of, but he's God. And Jews are just like, no, everything that Jesus and everything he said is moot. It doesn't apply. It's, and Christians declare themselves their enemies of Judaism way back in the time of Jesus, and they always have been. And Jews have perceived themselves to be in this cultural and religious and civilization level war for the last 2,000 years. an unbroken, continuous conflict. And Christians have just kind of over time, they just have somehow, really remarkably, if you think about it, they've gone from seeing Jews as they're the most anti-Christian group, their fundamental
Even more
enemy,
than like Muslims?
for most of history, I think so, yeah. I think for most of history, the most anti-Christian group of people on earth would have been considered Jews. And I think most Christians understood that. The Catholic Church had a very, very big problem with Jews going back many centuries.
Yeah.
Jews and the Catholic Church are mortal enemies. And then you fast forward, and now we live in this reality where it's not just that Jews and Christians coexist under this sort of Judeo-Christian umbrella. They're actually put on a pedestal. Most American Christians put Jews on a pedestal.
For sure.
They think they're extra special.
Oh, yeah.
They think they're chosen. They think that they're able to get away with a bunch of things that, no one else can get away with.
They justify.
Yeah.
It's just constant justification.
Yeah. And they do a bunch of mental gymnastics in order to do that.
Because of the idea of Judeo-Christianity and Christian Zionism.
And that's a very new development.
Well, yeah, it was after the creation of the state of Israel.
Right.
And
No, it was before that. It was in the early 1900s.
Okay.
Yeah. Late 1800s. That's right. The pastor
Guest appearance of the real Clyde.
Yeah.
In the background. Yeah, well, we got a stream coming later. Don't worry. Yeah, okay, so then you got the creation of the state of Israel.
Right.
And then even though it came around the 1800s or whatever, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about the bridge, and then we can end here. The bridge of when the first idea of Judeo-Christianity came, what's that evolution looked like up until right now?
Well, so what's really interesting, that's one of the most fascinating parts of history, right? Because we talked earlier about the late 1800s, how there's this whole Jewish question aspect. There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of sort of ideas about how this question is going to be answered. And then right in the early 1900s, you start having a bunch of revolution. And most of that, the way that we learn about these
Hey, if you guys are enjoying this episode, please make sure you subscribe to my YouTube if you haven't yet. Follow along for all of the coming episodes. I have a bunch of guests lined up. It's going to be awesome. I always aim to bring conversations that just get down to truth and share information that is what I believe so vital and so important to everybody. And it's just that. It's truth. And it doesn't matter who it offends. It doesn't matter who it quite frankly, who's happy about it. I don't care. It's just about knowing the truth. And that's what you're going to get here. The good, honest conversations and some of the most valuable and important information I think we need at this time and age, especially. So please subscribe to my YouTube and make sure that you also support my guests. Follow them any way you can. And just appreciate you guys.
revolutions is that they're communist revolutions.
Mm-hmm.
But when you really dig deeper, and now this is sort of becoming common knowledge, they're really Jewish revolutions. They were very much Jewish-led revolutions wrapped in sort of a communist wrapper. They had communist packaging. And there's these horrible, civil wars. There's these horrible genocides and all this kind of stuff happens in the early 1900s. Of course, World War I happened around that time. And the real turning point in World War I was the Bolshevik Revolution, which took place in 1917. But Russia had already for the previous 2 decades, they had a bunch of problems with Jewish terrorists.
Right.
And the first attempt at a revolution, I think, was in 1905. And the 1905 is when the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a fascinating document. And I have a whole ebook about that too, which I will blow people's minds. But that was first exposed in 1905. And a really interesting thing about that is when it was exposed, it was always considered to be an anti-Semitic hoax and a forgery and all this kind of stuff. It was kind of, it was criticized from the moment it came out. But a copy from the original author that got a hold of it, he sent it to the Archduke of he was a direct relative of the Tsar, and he was an Archduke. I don't remember his name at this moment, but he was basically a very high minister level official in Russia at that time. He sent it to him. He wanted to get it into his hands to sort of alert him at this plot to overthrow the Christian governments of Europe that existed at that time. He received it, and he sent it back with a reply. The reply is really quite mind-blowing because it was only a 2-word reply from the Archduke, this high level. It'd be like if the Secretary of Defense or something wrote you back a 2-word reply. His 2 words, too late. He was assassinated by Jewish terrorists the same year, the Archduke was. And that was in 1905.
Can we look that up?
Yeah.
What do we type in for that? What do we look at? How do we look that up?
Look up our Russian Archduke assassination. I'm pretty sure it's 1905.
Can we look up the response in the letter?
Probably not. That's pretty obscure.
How'd you find it?
In a book about the protocols, which is the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Like I said, if you look it up, you're immediately going to find out that that's the wrong Archduke. We're looking for a different Archduke.
Go to
of Russia.
ChatGPT. Use ChatGPT for now. Type this in. Archduke, and it was in Russia, right?
Yeah.
Archduke in Russia.
Or it might have been the Grand Duke. Let's look up the Grand Duke.
Archduke, just do Archduke/Grand Duke in Russia. Response to, what would it have been to? The response to what?
You're probably not going to find that.
Let's just try.
Yeah. Respond to Serge Nihilus. Serge. Serge Nihilus is the name of the author that originally published the protocols.
Serge.
Serge.
Yep.
Nihilus.
Nihilist.
No, it would be spelled Nilus. Yeah.
Let's see what we get. I'm just curious. Okay, zoom in on that. Yeah, of course, historians treat it as unreliable. They don't say it's wrong, though.
Right.
Nihilus claimed that before publishing the protocols, he submitted them to the Russian Grand Duke, in some sources named Grand Duke Serge Alexandrovich of Russia for examination. According to Nihilus, or sources favorable to him, after reading the text, the Grand Duke allegedly returned them with a short, despairing message, too late. Nihilus then reportedly, failing to get further official interest for action, included the protocols as an appendix to his 1905 second edition of his book. Per Nihilus, his supporters, the response from the Grand Duke amounted to a two-word message, too late, implying perhaps that the alleged conspiracy was already too advanced or that nothing could be done.
Right. Okay, so that was in 1905. Now let's look. Now take Grand Duke Serge Alexandrovich and find out when he was assassinated and how.
So that was in 1905. Now
Right.
say how was Sergil Nihilus assassinated, and when and how? And how?
Same year.
Same year, 17 February 1905, inside the Kremlin, riding in his carriage. Member of the Socialist Revolutionary Party's combat organization, Ivan Kalyayev, however you say that word, approached the Grand Duke's carriage, threw a bomb directly in the carriage. Explosion blew the carriage apart and killed the Grand Duke instantly. Arrested on the spot, tried, and later executed. Why he was targeted: the Socialist Revolutionaries viewed as a symbol of autocratic repression, responsible for harsh policies of Governor General Moscow, crackdowns 1904-1905 unrest, expulsions of Jews from certain Moscow districts.
So we have a plan for Jews to overthrow these governments that were hostile to Jews and take control of them. Very well laid, very elaborate plan. And by the way, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is one of the most profound political documents that you will ever read. It ranks with the most profound political documents in history. It is by no means some silly little document that someone threw together to make Jews look bad.
Whoever
wrote it
talks
was brilliant.
about that? Because I've heard it before, but I don't know much about it.
That's why I wrote a whole analysis of it. So it is a plan. It's a 24-point plan that was supposedly written by some kind of high council of Jews. It's thought that it was either Jewish revolutionaries or Jewish bankers. They do mention Jewish bankers, but powerful Jews of some kind had their own answer to the Jewish question. And their answer was, the only way that we are going to be able to solve this untenable position that we Jews have in Europe is by taking over the governments of Europe, infiltrating them and subverting them, and ultimately overthrowing them from inside by corrupting them, by, throwing their economies into disarray, by, poisoning the minds of the masses, whatever. There's many means that are discussed. But we need to take control of them so that we can be in charge of them, we can exploit them, we can ultimately rule over them. And that's how we are going to solve this untenable situation. It's because it's going to be either them in charge of us or us in charge of them, and we're going to win this war. Now, that was immediately considered to be an anti-Semitic hoax.
It literally says the famous "too late" quote appears only in later fringe or conspiracist accounts.
Right. So you have this plan that came about. It was immediately called an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. It was first published in 1905 when supposedly this guy sent it to this Grand Duke, hoping that he would be able to do something about it. Supposedly he sends it back saying too late. All of that is considered a bunch of anti-Semitic conspiracy theory.
The idea of Greater
he's
Israel.
killed by a group of Jews.
Yeah, you know what else is also a conspiracy theory, or was until about, 3 months ago maybe, the Greater Israel Project. But now they're openly talking about it.
Right.
Netanyahu and the freaking Likud are openly talking about Greater Israel.
Right.
But that was a conspiracy theory for how long? How many years? Anytime you said that, it was like,
Right.
Now, oh no, it's not. It's open. We're talking about it now.
No, I know. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, I find it to be fascinating. I've read it many times. I've analyzed the crap out of it. Like I said, I put together a whole mini course about it that I find it fascinating. The main reason I find it fascinating, number one, intellectually, it's profound. Because it's basically saying the people, the Goyim, it talks about the Gentile masses as Goyim. They're stupid, they're ignorant, they're immoral, they're corrupt. They have allowed us to take so much control of their civilizations already. They don't deserve self-rule. They don't deserve democracy. They have proven to be a bunch of idiots, basically. And they need to be ruled over the people who are the most capable, and that is us. So by subverting, overthrowing them, by throwing their economies into disarray, by whatever means, we're going to take that over. Now that, of course, when it was brought to the public
Almost
eye,
like it relates to something real modern.
well, that's why I call it authenticated by virtue of completion. Because in 1905 or 1906 or 1907, if you read that, it would be considered pretty extreme. And of course, there'd be a lot of people who say it's outrageous to say that Jews are doing that stuff. But if you read the 24 points from today's perspective, 120 years later,
Can we read them?
it's a little bit too much to read, I think, right now.
Okay.
Although I do have, I basically summarize them in my course.
Just type this in. Type in summarize the 24 points of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion in one sentence or two sentences each. One sentence each. 24 points of
What you'll find is basically
the
that
protocols.
describes
The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. 24 points. 24 points of the Protocols of the Elder of Zion in one sentence each.
what you'll find is it sounds an awful lot like where Western society is today.
Well, that's why I want to read it. Because if you read like the 10 points of communism, guess what? It's the same damn thing. Okay. So the forgery claims that Jews plan to undermine governments and morals and seize global power. Alleges a strategy to manipulate politics and government institutions of domination, intend to promote despotism and disorder, weaken societies, manipulation of freedoms and destabilize states, spread corruption, materialism, and tools of control, destabilize economies and gain financial supremacy, incite global conflict and unrest, provisional governments conceal their rule, manipulate education, thought, culture, control minds, corruption of a tool of Jewish control, dominate the press and public opinion, markets, control the markets of finance to subjugate nations, control entertainment and leisure to distract populations, exploit religion and weaken traditional beliefs, use violence and terror to impose rule, manipulation of school curricula to mold obedient masses, subjugate the clergy and distort faith, control legal systems and courts, weaken family structures and morals for domination, create a universal taxation system and consolidate power, control the land, property, and industry, intend a global aristocracy ruled by a Jewish king, spying and surveillance and maintain power. All nations will submit to the ruler.
Almost all of those have been achieved to some degree.
And what's even crazier is we've already shown 2 clips of people that are Jewish who have basically confirmed.
Right.
I mean, Homeboy talked about Soros. Soros legitimately is the the part in there about violence and terror to impose rule. And
Yeah, you have demoralizing people. You have manipulation
Demoralization.
of school curriculum. You've got subjugate the clergy and distort faith. I mean, has that happened anywhere more than the United States and
not
Zionist
only that,
Christianity?
not only that, that's literally happening right now. They are spending millions of dollars to geofence and target private Christian American citizens' cell phones,
Right.
to garner support and propagandize them in behalf of Israel.
And that goes directly to point 23, spying and surveillance to maintain power.
Well, and that's a big one too. That's happening right. I mean, you have the freaking Palantir.
Right. So these are still called an anti-Semitic forgery or a hoax or whatever. By any means possible, they discredit this. But if you read them, it pretty plainly describes where we're at today in all of Western civilization. Now, this might have been hard to believe in 1905 or 1910 or 1915, but it's not hard to believe today. That's why I say they're authenticated by virtue of completion. Because no matter how many times you try to discredit this document, if you read it, you can tell that almost all of these points have been achieved. So who was doing it? Well, if you look at all these places where there's power, most of them are Jews.
Banks, Hollywood, media.
Promoting revolution, feminism, LGBT movement, all these things.
Violence,
they're Jewish.
discord.
Yeah, they're always Jewish movements.
I heard something the other day that really resonated. Actually, it said the best way to describe this whole thing is it's not all Jews, but it's always a Jew.
Yeah, they're involved in
which is
just about everything
freaking
bad
crazy.
for civilization.
Which is freaking crazy.
Yeah,
and that is I would say that is something that I believe because. Again, man, I've said this many, many, many times. I am not the type of person that believes that you can label an entire group because of the sins of some or the sins of many. I don't believe that.
Yeah.
And so, I'm just like any other time. I'm not saying it's an entire group of people. I think that that's asinine. I don't think that that's fair to do to anyone at all.
Right.
But you absolutely have to recognize the fact that it is largely dominated, and there is a very prevalent and obvious imbalance,
right,
when it comes to, that's crazy.
And it's a repeating pattern throughout all of history. The United States is almost exactly where Germany was culturally and morally and socially, and pretty soon going to be economically where Germany was in the 20s and 30s. Because civilizations find themselves at a point where Jews have infiltrated every concentration of power and they're controlling it, and they fight back so powerfully against the implication that they control it, but by exercising that control to shut people down or to silence people,
it makes it so much more obvious.
They prove that they have that power.
Yes.
And that happens over and over and over.
It's the same thing. It's like if you want to know who has the most power, look at who you can't talk about, who you can't criticize, you can't talk about, you can't.
And they're the only group that is kind of like immune to that.
Literally. Not only that, it's the only group that when you do, you are destroyed.
Yeah.
I mean, like, bro.
Because they have the power. They have the collective power, and they know that they have the collective power. They're perfectly well aware of that.
But I also think that it does such an injustice for all the other people. Like, it just... I don't know, man. I've heard people say that Netanyahu and the far right-wing government of Israel, I've heard so many Jewish people who have said they absolutely hate him.
Yeah.
And they hate what they're doing because it is hurting them. It is making it so much easier for people to actually become anti-Semitic.
Right.
When you look at that and you watch,
that's true.
And it is true. It's 100%. Like the far-right government of Israel and Netanyahu and these freaking psychos, they're literally creating more anti-Semitism than anyone else.
Right. But Jews typically will not take a position against themselves. It's very, very hard to get them to do that. They don't
Except
usually.
There are people in Israel who have stood up against it.
There are. Yeah, that always exists.
A lot.
Right.
Yeah.
But when you dig deeper, you find that they pretty much always do believe that they are better than everyone else and they should have that controlling position. And in a sense, they need that controlling position because the idea, like we said earlier, the untenability of them being able to coexist with other races and cultures, and the fact that they're always going to weasel their way to the top by any means necessary, means that any civilization, any race, any culture, any country that doesn't have some way of sort of pushing back on the Jewish influence is pretty much inevitably at some point going to be controlled by Jews, especially in so-called free societies. And at some point, it just becomes untenable. And we're reaching that point now in the United States. So many people are waking up to this sort of toxic and controlling influence that they have in so many industries. And it's not all industries. Like, they don't dominate agriculture. They don't dominate construction.
Right.
They concentrate in the ones where there's the most financial power, the most legal power, and the most sort of cultural influence power. Anywhere that they can shape and mold culture and narratives and the idea of, morality and things like that. That's where they tend to concentrate. So this is not a new thing. It's not like America is just this fascinating place where all this is happening for the first time. America is experiencing what has happened in many civilizations for the last couple thousand years. And we are just now becoming aware of this because now there's an interest in unearthing all of this old knowledge.
Yeah.
And
What do you think led to it the most? Why is this happening now versus before?
Well, what's really interesting is now it's becoming so obvious. It's not just like, I think the cat got out of the bag to some extent, but now it seems like it's being pushed in algorithms. It seems like it's being pushed in social media, and you're finding it in so many places where it's almost being shoved in front of people that wouldn't normally be looking for it. Right. So I looked for it. I looked really hard to find all the so-called quote unquote anti-Semitic literature because I wanted to see what it said. Is it just going to be a bunch of people saying like, oh, there's these greedy people with hooked nose and beady eyes that are always bad? No, it was actually very well documented, very consistent, and it's not usually openly racial. I've seen very, very, very little ever anti-Semitic literature that talks about how Jews have big noses or curly black hair or anything like that. That's almost something to like make fun
Again,
of them.
it's the
and
low hanging
discredit them.
fruit stuff.
Yes.
That just makes it.
Yes.
That makes the argument it's the stuff that actually makes it harder to have a conversation about just the general idea.
Yeah, you almost think they're creating it themselves just to discredit people who have actually thoughtful, nuanced, analytical reasons for why Jews and Gentile societies can't coexist. But it's very, very well documented, right? But now you're not just finding people who are actively looking for all this stuff. It's like people who are just average, everyday people. They're having it served up to them in their algorithms.
Yeah, it's
so
weird.
it is
It's
weird.
happening all the time.
It is weird. It's happening too much. It's happening so much that now you see they want it to happen.
And I've actually, you know what? I've actually said this. I've actually said that it feels very purposeful. It feels like to me, there's two possible options. Number one, what if it's happening because as they build out these AI surveillance systems and as they build out all these crazy, AI censorship things, and they're buying up the social media platforms and everything. I mean, if you really wanted to completely censor and shut down every and any opposition to this, well, you'd want to expose the opposition in the best way possible, which if you start serving all this stuff up, you're going to expose everybody that buys into it pretty dang quick.
For sure.
And then all you have to do...
they've already done that.
And they've already done it. And then all you have to do is push a button and say, nope, no more of that, no more of this, no more of you, no more of you, no more of you.
Right.
Which they're already doing. They're having literal conferences talking about getting rid of Tucker Carlson's and the people like that. And dude, it's crazy. They're literally having massive conferences to talk about solely how do we silence this person?
Right.
How do we do everything that we're not supposed to believe is... Like, we're supposed to be completely against this.
Right.
And you have the right that's supporting it. You have the MAGA idiots out there that are like, yeah, let's do this. Let's get rid of this person because it's crazy, bro.
Yeah.
But then the other thing that I said is, if their ultimate goal is to have a nation state, to have the greater Israel nation state where it's just them and it is complete supremacy.
Right.
Well, man, what's happening right now sure would cause the absolute need to have that.
Right.
Where it's like
that's basically the Zionist Project.
It's
That's
almost like
it's almost
like the Zionists and these people are actually trying to actively answer the Jewish question in modern day.
They have been for over 100 years.
Which is the nation state of Israel.
Right.
And so I hate to say it, but it almost confirms their their push
Right.
that the nation state of Israel should exist, and that it almost confirms the need for Zionism.
Right. So the two really important points I want to make on that. Do you know what was the first government, the first actual government in history that directly supported the migration of Jews to what was at that time Palestine?
Germany.
Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
So they were actually working together.
I know that.
with the Zionists
Yes,
to get them
I
there.
know that.
And we're thought that this is, this anti-Semitic government that wanted to eradicate them. But actually,
There's been,
very
yeah,
big
but that's
push.
not. There's been rabbis. There's been Jews. I've heard Jews talk about that. That's a very well known thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So why would the Zionists work together with what was supposedly their mortal enemy at that
Because
time?
they both had the same goal.
They had the same goal.
The same goal was we don't want to be here. We want to be in our own place.
We
want to be our own
and
people.
many Jews got ripped out of their comfortable lives in Germany, right? They got ripped out of homes they've owned for generations.
Yeah.
They got
And there
ripped
was
out of good
horrific
jobs
things
or
that
whatever.
happened.
Very horrific
Absolutely
things that
horrific
happened.
things.
But the Zionists wanted those things to happen because they wanted Jews to get kicked out to be reconcentrated in what they considered to be the Holy Land. Now, there's very important Jewish prophecy. This is the second point I wanted to make. Very important Jewish prophecy that says in the end times, all the Jews have to be reconcentrated in Israel. Now, the largest population of Jews in the whole world outside of Israel is in the United States. About 7 to 7.5 million Jews reside in both Israel and the United States. And then there's obviously Jewish communities throughout the world, but by far there's the most in the United States. In order to complete their prophecies, in order to sort of wrap up the Zionist project, they have to get all of those Jews to leave all of the other countries and want to go to Israel. How are they going to do that when Jews experience such a comfortable life in the United States? They're doing very, very well here. So there needs to be a situation that's created that's totally untenable for them. So they need to be basically kicked out. They need to be forced to leave. And how is that going to happen? Well, they've already done it. They've proven that it can be done because they did it in Nazi Germany. They allowed there to be this rise in anti-Semitism so much that Jews got kicked out. And that would be considered a very successful project for the Zionists because they successfully got Jews kicked out of where they were comfortable and forced to go back to Israel to build up Israel. So they already know the pattern. They can make it happen again if they want to. And there is quite a bit of evidence that they want to, because only by getting all the Jews of the entire world reconcentrated in Israel can they make their prophecies complete.
Do you
Until
think
that
that's what they're?
happens,
Do you
yes.
actually? Do you think that's what they're doing?
Yes, I do. They're manufacturing.
That's
the
why
end times.
Netanyahu and all these people. That's why it's so blatant.
Right.
That's why it's like, because I'm not the only one that's saying this. There are a lot of people that are saying it's almost like they want the world to know that they committed a genocide.
Yeah,
It's
they
almost
do.
like they
need
want the world to know that they're doing all the things they're doing. They're not hiding it.
Because according to the Bible, in the end times, all the nations will come against Israel.
Yeah.
And also in the end times, all Jews will reconcentrate in Israel. Because at that point in time, there's going to be some massive, end of the world type of global conflict where their God is going to come in on their side and allow them to win domination of the whole world. Then there will be the arrival of the Mashiach, who is not Jesus. They don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. They call it Mashiach. And there's actually going to be two. But it's basically a world-conquering king, someone who's violent and bloodthirsty and is going to vanquish the enemies of the Jews. And when all the dust settles of this vast, global conflict, they are going to be the last man standing. And there will be a world government, and it will be headquartered in Israel. That is their prophecy. So they have achieved many, many things that they've wanted to achieve. They're kind of more or less unstoppable. I mean, it's taken them a long time. They've taken a lot of casualties. It's cost them a lot of effort. Certainly many, many Jews have died. But for the most part, what the really radical, hardcore, extremist Jews want, they get. It takes them a while, but they get it. And they are continuing.
And they're
to
not
get it.
hiding
They have,
it.
No, they have pretty much an unbroken
The
record of
far-right
success.
radical extremist party in Israel is like the Ben Gvir, the Smotrich, all those.
Right.
They are not hiding it.
Right.
It is out in the open. They are telling exactly what they're doing and why they're doing and how they're doing it. And then it's almost like they just know they're going to get away with it no matter what.
Right.
They did. I mean, they got away with everything they just did for the last 2 years.
Right.
It's not like a question. It
And
happened.
based on Zionist priorities, like obviously Jews, they're really sore about the Holocaust and they talk about it constantly and they kind of pound it into the brains. Like I think a lot of American students can say they remember almost nothing of their history classes,
Except for the
Holocaust. Yeah,
because it's like a month long.
Yeah, I've heard that. So it's even longer now. In California, it's like 2 months long. But I've heard that said quite a lot, and there's reasons for that. But what the Zionists wanted, they accomplished, and the Holocaust helped them do that. because that caused there to be an exodus of Jews out of Europe. And a lot of them ended up going to Israel to populate Palestine and build it up. And a lot of the original founders of Israel were literal Bolshevik communist terrorists. And Israel was founded on terrorism. In fact, the most hardcore terrorists militias literally became the Jewish military.
The Ergen and Lehi.
Right.
They were the terrorist groups that arose from the Haganah.
Right.
And the very first terrorist attack in the freaking in the region was the bombing of the King David Hotel.
Right.
That was the very first by all definitions of what terrorism actually is.
Right.
That was that.
And at that time they were targeting primarily British police and British military officers.
Yeah, because they wanted the occupation to end.
Exactly.
The British occupation.
And they did that.
Ironically.
So
and they did. They got him out.
Right. So did the Holocaust victimize many, many Jews? Yes,
Yes.
it did. I don't believe it's the number that we're told, but we can set that aside. It was definitely bad for a lot of Jews who were just sort of regular everyday Jews, but according to Zionism, it achieved the mission. They got Israel created. They got their state, right? Because after the end of World War II, basically they were like, okay, the only possible answer to the Jewish question at this point in time is give them their country. And they gave them their country, and they gave them the worst possible place in the whole world. They had many options, but they didn't want any of them. Nazi Germany also had an option, the Madagascar option, which was,
I heard about that.
they actually put a lot of effort into trying to come up with a pretty good solution. And it was quite a bit better than the UK solution or the Russian solution or the American solution, because it gave them a lot more land. But in any case, they got the one place that would be a powder keg permanently. The one place in the world where it was guaranteed to cause endless bloodshed and violence and hostility and pretty much be the most divisive possible thing.
Palestine.
They stuck them in Palestine. That's where the Allied powers, the nations that were victorious at the end of World War II, consciously chose to put them in the worst possible place on the entire planet. And there was a lot of opposition to that, but all of that opposition was silenced. There were a lot of very notable, very powerful American people in positions of power at that time who thought it was an absolutely horrible idea, and the United States government supported it anyway. So the Zionists, the ultra-radical Zionist Jews and their ilk, the billionaires, the people, the high-level intelligence people, however you want to define it, I usually call it the International Jewish Mafia because they operate like a mafia. They always get what they want. They do always get what they want.
And that's a real thing, by the way, too. I mean, even if you just read the books by
right behind you, One Nation Under Blackmail.
One Nation Under Blackmail.
Yeah.
You read those by Whitney Webb. Right. She talks about it. It's well documented, well researched. Like
a lot of
just
people,
like there was the Irish mafia, the Italian mafia. There's the Jewish mafia.
Yeah, the Jewish mafia it's the ultimate mafia of all mafias. They're the most successful,
they're the most backed,
longest lasting.
They're the most financially backed. They're the most connected.
Yeah,
through all the intelligence.
And they probably existed the longest. Because to a very large extent, the Talmud, a lot of Talmudic morality would be considered like a mafia type of morality. It encourages the ability to commit crimes against, Gentile populations. So I would almost argue they're the original mafia, in my opinion. They are. So they're the most powerful mafia. They operate like a mafia. They're global. They've penetrated governments all over. Now we know that. Like now that the Epstein scandal has come out, we know that they've penetrated many Western governments. And this is one guy. This is one Epstein. I am not foolish enough to believe that Epstein was one single mastermind running this whole thing.
No.
He was probably mid-level.
Yeah.
He was realistically probably
massive, expansive blackmail operation, which, by the way, we still don't have any of the information from,
right,
which we're never going to get.
And yeah, exactly. Ever. And I think there's probably at least 1 or 2 dozen, at least, people just like Epstein with as much wealth, as much power, as much influence who are running the same type of subversion campaigns in governments among billionaires currently.
Yeah.
And one of the things, there's a really remarkable document that was filed in court I believe in 2020 in a New York court, and the case was promptly thrown out. But it was by one of the sort of like Epstein survivors. I don't remember the name off the top of my head.
Guthrie?
No, I believe it was a different one.
Okay.
But it was thrown out. But one of the most remarkable things, the complaint that was filed, before it was thrown out, it was about a 14 to 16 page complaint. And among the various complaints, because it was many bullet points in the complaint, and many plaintiffs. But what it was basically saying was this organization, this mafia-like organization that was headed by Epstein, what they were trying to do was, a part of it was the whole sex blackmail thing. Like that was an aspect. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing they were doing was they were compromising heads of states.
Oh, of course.
Compromising scientists, compromising
with
heads
the
of
honeypot
businesses.
Yes.
Right. And they were using the leverage that was gained over these people. And it wasn't all honeypot. And they also used blackmail.
Yep.
They used threats of assassination. They used threats of, harm against loved ones.
Yep.
They were using these powerful and influential people, using their knowledge, using their connections, in some cases their ability to be master traders. You're talking about like investment fund managers or hedge fund managers who are compromised. They are using them in order to basically get them to serve the mafia. So, I mean, was there these nasty massages happening on an island? Yes. But is that the most important thing for the sake of the world? No. The most important thing for the sake of the world is you have many of the most powerful people in the world who have no choice but to serve this international Jewish-led mafia.
And the fact that it was largely revolving around minors.
Right.
And children.
Right. But that's the only reason that existed, was to make it so diabolical that it couldn't be excused, because then there's no excuse for that.
There's literally nothing you can say.
And to this day, the one like Prince Andrew in the UK was, stripped of his titles or whatever. That's the one thing. And I think ultimately Trump is going to have to answer for that too. But that's the one thing that like no one can really get away with. If you're implicated in Epstein, you have to.
I'll be honest though. I don't think, this is my personal take. And then, yeah, this has been awesome, dude. This is a good conversation. This is awesome. Thank you so much.
Interesting stuff, right?
Yeah. I think, I've said this multiple times. I don't think Trump was implicated in it, because here's the thing. His mentor was Roy Cohn.
Mm-hmm.
To have a mentor like Roy Cohn, who was a master manipulator and a master of his craft as far as putting powerful people in compromising situations and then using it against them, like J. Edgar Hoover and these other people. I think Trump's a lot of things, but he's not an idiot when it comes to business and when it comes to these kind of things. So like, in my opinion, if Trump really wanted to do the things that they were doing on that island, he could have done it in his penthouse and nobody would have known the difference. No cameras, no nothing.
Right.
I don't think Trump is stupid enough to put himself in those kind of compromising situations. I think if there's a case that Trump is implicated, it's not him. It's the people around him that he needs.
Right.
Ultimately. Or it's his family that's being threatened or whatever.
Could be.
Yeah. Or if you want to consider the Samson option, that's another thing that, I mean, if that's being held over his head, what would you do? Right. Like, I don't know. I guess what I'm getting at is this, I don't think he's implicated. I think, again, use the same term, but I think that's just like low hanging fruit. I think that's just kind of like, it's easy to say, oh yeah, Trump's in the files. I don't think he is. I don't think he's stupid enough to be in the files. I think if anything, he's just, the people around him are more implicated, and there's different types of blackmail, like you said.
Right.
I don't think they have that kind of blackmail on Trump. I think they have a different kind of blackmail. But either way, I definitely think that there's a possibility that Trump is in someone's pocket.
Right.
One way or the other.
He's pretty blatantly being controlled.
Yeah, it's pretty freaking insane.
Right.
Like
by Israeli friendly interests.
Yeah, dude, it's crazy.
However you define it.
Well,
or however that came about.
And honestly, it's also the fact that, and we've talked about this a couple times, like the Gaza Riviera project and everything, that's real. That's 100% real. Trump's part of it. Like, he
posted that bizarre video. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah. I was one of the only people that called it out too, because everybody else was like,
I immediately
no, this is just him trolling. No, it's not.
No,
it's not. This is not him trolling.
No.
And it's going to be interesting too to find out if the whole thing about Trump 2028 is actually him trolling either, because we've been seeing a lot of that, and everybody's he's just trolling people. Well,
no, I don't think so. I think he's going to stay in office.
We'll see. But if that happens, I'll tell you what, dude, it's over if that happens.
Right.
Well, man, that was awesome.
Interesting stuff, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We could talk for hours, bro.
Yeah,
I really appreciate you coming out here.
I appreciate the invite.
Dude, for sure. We're going to have to do it again. Absolutely. Maybe we'll do it in Mexico next time.
Cool.
Yeah. Tell everybody again where they can find you, how they can support you.
I'm Cato Dezorra on Instagram.
Yeah.
You're pretty easy to find there. And I'm still growing. I mean, I'm relatively small compared to you and a lot of people in this space, but I've definitely been growing a lot lately. And or catodezorra.com. That's where I have all of my books, all the stuff I published on this, my courses. I'm really proud of that stuff. Like we've talked about, it's the culmination of years worth of research. And I've tried to make them really legitimately academic level, like bulletproof.
Yeah, dude.
I try to make it bulletproof so that someone who's like a scholar on the rival side, like people who think that I'm just like you could have like Zionist rabbinical scholars and look through this stuff. And obviously they're going to take offense to it or they're going to criticize or whatever, but they're not going to say that I fabricated stuff They're not going to say that any of this stuff is fake. They're going to be able to look up the references and be like, all right, that he did a good job here, but he's wrong. Right? And that's fine. But you can't say that I fabricated his stuff. You can't say I was lazy. You can't say that any of the stuff is not backed by evidence, backed by many resources, by, you know, references from throughout history. I've put a lot of work into that. And my biggest thing is I want people to wake up to this, but not in a way that's that low hanging fruit, like we talked about.
Yeah.
Because that's not helpful. If you have people that are just radicalized by a bunch of bullshit posts on social media, that actually turns off people who are the better thinkers. The intelligent people, the successful people, the professionals, the people who could be influential, those are the people you need to create any kind of real cultural change. And those people are going to be turned off by the people who are, you know, spreading things that are just very inflammatory and very uneducated. You know, that's not helpful. So I've tried to make resources that exist at a very high level so that people who are like academic or intellectual oriented, they will go to that and be like, wow, this is really, this guy makes really good points and it's well researched. And I looked up some of this stuff myself and I found out it's true. And
Dude, everything you said, we looked up to.
Yeah.
Like,
and I could keep going.
everything.
Yeah.
I mean, we looked it all up and it all, yeah.
So when you do that, you realize, okay, there's a lot of genuine information here. So what am I going to do with this now? Can I continue to keep living the lie? Can I continue to keep existing in denial that all this is happening? Or am I going to take a stand? And a lot of people I've had an influence on, a lot of people, they really disagreed with me. They thought I was totally wrong. They thought, you know, I've had a lot of hostility come my way. But after a while, if I tell people, look it up, look up my resources, check my research, do it yourself. Don't just believe me because I'm a talking head on the internet. Do the research yourself. And I've had a lot of people come around and say, you know, I thought you were a wacko at first and you pissed me off. But after a while, I realized you really back your shit up. And some of the people who came to me with hostility have become some of my best supporters. And I think that means a lot. Yeah. So you have to be able to back your shit up with a lot of evidence. It can't just be social media shit. It can't be viral. It can't be comical. It can't be stupid. It has to be at a high level because I really believe we are dealing with some of the most diabolically brilliant people in the entire world. These people, they're not stupid. They're very, very well prepared for conflict. They're usually thinking many moves ahead, and they've done this many, many times before. They've infiltrated governments. They've infiltrated major corporations. They've infiltrated international banks, and they've subverted these things, and they've twisted them and contorted them to serve this global agenda that is so powerful, they think they're going to take over the entire world. And I mean, that's not delusional. They're pretty well on their way.
Quite frankly, it's biblical.
Right.
That's the scary part.
Right.
It's biblical.
Right.
Like it's actually
and
biblical.
They use the Bible, you know, as a weapon. Yeah. So in order to resist against that bleak future, if we don't want it, how do we arm ourselves to do that? We really need to level ourselves up intellectually and academically. We need to study. We need to, you know, to tighten up our game. We need to raise our IQ. We need to we need to work together on this. We need to educate each other in a way that's really high quality. So at some point, if there's any kind of movement that comes about, it's going to be a very intellectually and morally and spiritually very well prepared movement. It's not going to be because we saw a bunch of stuff in the algorithm lately, and then when the algorithm changed, now we're all thinking different shit. It has to be stuff that where we've put so much time and effort and energy into it, we're really, really well prepared to go against the most diabolical, most powerful force in the whole world, I believe.
Yeah, that's crazy, dude. It's freaking nuts. Mind blown. But geez, that's awesome. Yeah, we definitely need to do this again soon.
I hope we will.
Guys, thank you so much for all the support. We appreciate you, and I'll see you next time.